On the night of their third wedding anniversary, the young wife Eleanor brought home a tiramisu, a cake filled with love, as a surprise for her husband, Major Caleb Thorne. But the surprise turned into a horrifying shock when she witnessed him with his mistress completely naked, entwined on the landing of the emergency staircase. She didn't cry. She didn't cause a scene. Instead, she quietly recorded the entire spectacle and sent it straight to her father-in-law, General Robert Thorne. A single video, a single tap of the send button, was all it took to turn her cheating husband's reputation, career, and dreams of promotion to dust. The divorce was swift, no demands for assets, no tearful screaming matches, only the chilling decisiveness of a wife who had sacrificed her youth for her husband. And him, from a promising army major, he was left with nothing. He lost his wife, lost his position, and was dishonorably discharged from the military. Will this woman find the light in her life again after such a devastating collapse? Join us as we explore the full modern romance, a story full of drama and heartbreak, but also brimming with the resilience and spirit of a strong woman, right here on our channel. The click of Eleanor's heels echoed softly on the cold marble floor of the apartment building's grand lobby in Arlington, Virginia. The sound was crisp and solitary in the stillness of the late night. It was already 11 p.m. In her hands, she held a box containing an exquisitely decorated tiramisu cake, Caleb's favorite. Today was their third wedding anniversary. Caleb had told her, "The unit has a last-minute briefing at the Pentagon. I'll be home very late." He'd told her to go to sleep first and not to wait up with dinner. Eleanor had just smiled, knowing her husband's workaholic nature. He was in the final stretch for a promotion review, and the pressure was unavoidable. As a military wife, she was all too familiar with solitary dinners and holidays spent without him. But a wedding anniversary was different. She wanted to give him a small surprise, a little sweetness to soothe the stress he was carrying. She hadn't driven. She had intentionally walked home from the bakery. The D.C. night air was brisk and cold, but her heart felt unusually warm. 3 years, not a long time, but long enough for her once a Georgetown professor's daughter, who knew only books to become a capable wife, who managed everything at home so her husband could focus on his duty. She had given up her promising career as a diplomatic translator to become his support system. Her friends all said she was foolish, but she just smiled. Because she was in love, she was willing to do it. Seeing Caleb in his crisp uniform, seeing the oak leaves on his epaulets shine brighter each year, made her feel that all her sacrifices were worthwhile. The building she lived in was a complex reserved for senior military officers' families, with excellent security and a profound quietness. She stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 12th floor. The elevator doors opened slowly to a long, silent hallway illuminated only by the faint, warm glow of the corridor lights. Their apartment was at the very end. Just a few steps from her front door, Eleanor suddenly froze. In the near absolute silence, she thought she heard a strange sound, very faint, very vague. A suppressed moan, a ragged, hasty breath, mixed with the rustling of fabric. The sound wasn't coming from any of the apartments. It seemed to be echoing from the emergency staircase at the end of the hall. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. Who would be on the emergency stairs at this hour? She unconsciously slowed her steps, holding her breath to listen. The sounds grew clearer. It was a woman's moan mixed with the deep, husky voice of a man filled with desire. Caleb. A little faster. I can't take it anymore. Caleb. Those two words struck Eleanor's head like a sledgehammer. The cake box in her hands suddenly felt immensely heavy. It couldn't be. She must have misheard. Her husband was at a briefing at the Pentagon. How could he be here? But that deep, husky voice, though altered by lust, was one she recognized instantly. It was the voice of the man she had shared a bed with for the past 3 years. Eleanor's feet felt as if they were cast in lead, each step toward the emergency exit door weighing 1,000 pounds. The metal door had a small, rectangular, wire-reinforced glass window near the top. She dared not make a sound, only tiptoeing carefully, pressing her body against the cold door and peering through the hazy glass. And then, her entire world collapsed. Through the deliberately fogged glass, the image inside wasn't perfectly clear, but it was clear enough. Under the dim yellow glow of the motion sensor light on the stairwell, a tall man was pressing a woman against the railing. Neither of them wore a single stitch of clothing. His uniform was carelessly tossed on the floor at his feet. A nurse's white scrubs shared the same fate. That man with his familiar bare back with the small eagle tattoo behind his shoulder blade that she had traced countless times was none other than Caleb Thorne. And the woman clinging to him like a serpent, tilting her head back to moan, was Heather, the young, beautiful nurse from Walter Reed Medical Center whom he often praised as being so understanding. A ringing filled Eleanor's ears, and all the sounds around her vanished, replaced by a roaring scream inside her chest. The cake box slipped from her hands and fell to the floor with a dull thud. The sweet tiramisu was shattered just like her heart at that moment. Pain, humiliation, rage, all the emotions swirled together, nearly making her lose all reason and kick the door in. But she didn't. Eleanor bit her lower lip so hard she drew blood. She took a step back, hiding in a dark corner of the hallway where the light couldn't reach. Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes were frighteningly cold. Scream cause a scene only to be met with his pity and a web of deceitful excuses. No, she didn't need any of that. Trembling, she pulled her phone from her purse. Her fingers were so cold and stiff that it took several tries to open the video camera function. She took a deep breath, trying to hold the phone steady. Then she once again crept toward the door, raised the phone to the level of the window, and pressed record. The phone screen captured everything clearer than what she could see with her naked eye, every disgusting act, every lewd sound. With every second that passed, the knife in her heart twisted deeper. She filmed for nearly a minute that felt like an eternity. Once she had enough evidence, she quietly retreated, turned, and walked back to her apartment. The front door opened and closed without a sound. The home was as clean and warm as when she had left, but now it felt like a tomb burying her marriage alive. Eleanor collapsed onto the sofa, her body devoid of strength. She wasn't crying anymore. Her tears seemed to have run dry, leaving only an empty void and a cold, hard resolve. She opened her contacts and found the name saved as General Thorne. She composed a text message, each word she typed feeling like a stab to her own heart. "General, I'm sorry to bother you at this hour, but I think you need to see your son's true face." Then she selected the video file she had just recorded and attached it to the message. Her thumb hovered over the send button for a few seconds. This was the button that would destroy everything: Caleb's career, the Thorne family's honor, and her own 3-year marriage. But she no longer hesitated. She closed her eyes and decisively pressed send. In a stately study in a villa in Potomac, Maryland, General Robert Thorne was reading a military document. It was nearly midnight, but the habit of working late was deeply ingrained in him. The space was quiet, filled only with the soft rustle of paper and the faint scent of old books. Suddenly, the phone on his desk vibrated, signaling a new message. He frowned slightly. Who would be texting him at this hour? Seeing the sender's name was Eleanor, the stern expression on his face softened. To him, Eleanor was not just a daughter-in-law. She was like a sweet, sensible daughter. The girl always knew her place and would never bother him with trivial matters, especially at this hour. It must be something important. He picked up the phone and opened the message. Eleanor's brief text made him feel a sense of foreboding. When he tapped on the attached video file, the screen lit up. The obscene sounds and naked images assaulted his senses. General Thorne's face went from shock to a deep purple, then darkened with rage. His eyes were bloodshot. The hand holding the phone clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His goddamn son. He hadn't just betrayed his wife. He had committed this filthy act right in the military family complex, a place that upheld discipline and honor. This was no longer just a family matter. It was a disgrace to the uniform he wore, a slap in the face to the lifetime of honor he had built. Bang! General Thorne couldn't contain his fury and slammed the phone down on the desk. The nearby glass of bourbon was jolted, falling to the floor and shattering. The piercing sound of broken glass echoed through the room. Gritting his teeth, he picked up his desk phone and dialed a familiar number. The moment the other end connected, he roared, his voice filled with the authority and killing intent of an enraged general. "Caleb, if you are not home in 10 minutes, don't you ever call me Dad again?" Without waiting for a pod reply, he slammed the phone down. On the emergency staircase, their tryst had just ended. Caleb was buttoning his shirt, the feeling of satisfaction still lingering. Heather leaned against his sturdy chest, her voice whiny. "Caleb, when are you going to divorce her and give me a proper status?" Caleb frowned slightly. He was about to say a few sweet nothings to placate her when the phone in his pocket vibrated violently. Seeing the two words, "the general calling," he jumped quickly, motioning for Heather to be quiet as he answered. General Thorne's thunderous voice on the other end made him freeze. 10 minutes to be home. What was going on? A bad feeling told him something was terribly wrong. He didn't dare ask any more questions, just quickly answered, "Yes, sir," and hung up. His face was pale. He turned and pushed Heather away. "You should go. There's an emergency at home." With that, he hastily grabbed his jacket from the floor, not even sparing her another glance, and rushed toward the elevator. The apartment door flew open, and Caleb burst in his mind in a chaotic whirl, trying to guess what had happened. He had expected to find an empty home, or at worst, his father waiting for him with a furious expression. But no. Sitting on the sofa, her back perfectly straight, was Eleanor. She was wearing a white silk nightgown, her long hair cascading down her back. Her face was bare of makeup, eerily calm. There were no tears, no rage, none of the pain he had imagined. She just sat there, as silent as a statue. It was her very calmness that sent a chill down his spine. "Eleanor, you're still awake," he stammered, trying to act natural. Eleanor didn't answer, merely tilting her chin toward the glass coffee table. Caleb followed her gaze. Lying neatly on the table was a stack of white paper with the bold title on top, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." And in the space for the wife's signature, the two words Eleanor Thorne were already signed clearly and decisively. Caleb's mind exploded. She knew. How could she know what? What are you doing? If something's wrong, we can talk about it slowly. Don't act rashly, he said, stepping forward intending to snatch the papers. Eleanor finally lifted her head. Her eyes met his, they were clear, but deep, devoid of any warmth or love, only a distance and coldness like a 1,000-year-old glacier. She spoke her voice even and without a ripple. Caleb, we're getting a divorce. After a pause, she added each word clear and firm. I don't want anything. I just want my freedom. The word divorce, uttered so calmly by Eleanor, felt like a death sentence. It shattered Caleb's facade of composure. He stared at her ice-cold face, unable to believe what he had just heard. What nonsense are you talking about, divorce? You want a divorce over a small misunderstanding. He stepped closer, his voice losing control, laced with an unreasonable anger. He reached out to crumple the petition, but Eleanor was quicker, grabbing it and stepping back. A small misunderstanding, she smirked, a sarcastic smile appearing for the first time on her beautiful but weary face. Major Thorne, you and Nurse Heather, naked and wrapped around each other on the emergency staircase railing. That's a small misunderstanding. Then tell me, what would you consider a big deal? Caleb froze the blood in his veins, turning to ice. She saw everything. How was that possible? Panic flooded his eyes. He could no longer maintain his calm demeanor. He knew if this got out, the career he had worked so hard to build, the bright future he dreamed of, would all turn to dust. His father would never forgive him. Instantly, his attitude shifted 180 degrees. The anger vanished, replaced by a look of utter panic and remorse. Thump! He suddenly dropped to his knees on the cold floor, his kneecaps hitting the marble with a hard sound. He looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed, his voice pleading and pathetic. Eleanor, I was wrong. I was so wrong. Can you forgive me just this once, please, just this one time? Eleanor just looked at him in silence, her expression unwavering. She was all too familiar with his theatrics. It was just that this time his performance was more convincing than usual. Seeing her lack of reaction, Caleb scrambled forward, intending to grab her leg, but she moved back. He began spewing out the excuses he had already prepared in his mind. It was all because I drank too much. The unit had a celebration tonight, I couldn't refuse. I was so drunk I didn't know what was happening. It was Heather who seduced me. She got me drunk and led me out there. I wasn't in my right mind, I swear. He said this while holding up 3 fingers, his expression as earnest as a professional actor. Eleanor let out a laugh, a soft chuckle that was as sharp as a knife. Caleb, do you think I'm a 3-year-old, drunk and seduced? Do you have any idea how fake you look right now? She looked straight into his eyes, her voice turning a few degrees colder. Last month you said you had a sudden 3-day conference in Chicago, but you were actually on vacation in Key West with her, weren't you? That Tom Ford tie I've never seen you wear was a birthday gift from her, right? And those late-night calls you always took on the balcony, claiming they were about unit matters. You were actually whispering sweet nothings to your lover, weren't you? Each of Eleanor's questions was like a sledgehammer blow to Caleb's chest. His face went from pale to ashen. He never imagined that she knew about all the things he thought he had hidden so well. She knew, but she had stayed silent until today. Her silence wasn't ignorance. It was tolerance. It was her giving him a chance. But he had thrown it all away with his own hands. Seeing that his lies were no longer working, Caleb switched tactics. He appealed to their marital bond and, more importantly, to his career. Eleanor, we can't get a divorce. Can't you think about me for a moment? His voice became desperate. I'm at the most critical stage of my career. If I can just get through this review, I'll be promoted to lieutenant colonel. If we divorce now, especially for this reason, everything will be over. My future, our family's honor, it will all be destroyed. Can you bear to watch me lose everything? Finally, he had said it, the thing he cared about most. Not their broken love, not her pain, but his own career and future. Those words were the final straw, extinguishing the last flicker of hope in Eleanor's heart. She looked at the man kneeling at her feet, the man she once loved with all her being, and now felt only a profound sense of alienation and disgust. Your career is important, she repeated his words, her voice trembling with sarcasm. What about my youth and my trust? Are they worthless? Caleb, have you ever thought about what I've given up for you over the past 3 years? I gave up my beloved career. I cut off my social life, all to be your support system at home. I trusted you blindly, and what did I get in return? The most naked and humiliating betrayal. The tears she had been holding back finally broke free, but they were not tears of weakness. They were tears of ultimate disappointment. Just then, the doorbell rang urgently, cutting through their tense confrontation. Immediately after the front door swung open, General Robert Thorne strode in his face, a thunderous mask of fury. He was in civilian clothes, but the imposing aura of a general was undiminished. His sharp knife-like eyes swept over his pathetic kneeling son on the floor, then settled on Eleanor's tear-streaked but resolute face. His gaze held no blame for her, only endless apology and pain. General Thorne's arrival made the already tense atmosphere in the living room almost suffocating, so thick it felt like it could congeal. Seeing his father, Caleb trembled like a leaf in the wind. The fear of this strict man had been ingrained in him since childhood. He scrambled to his feet, stammering, "Dad." Crack! The sound of the slap was dry and brutal. General Thorne had used all his strength, striking his only son across the face. The blow was so powerful that Caleb staggered and fell to the floor, one side of his face swelling up immediately, a bright red handprint already visible. A trickle of blood oozed from the corner of his mouth. He was completely stunned, not from the pain, but from the shock. From childhood to adulthood, no matter how strict his father was, he had never laid a hand on him. This was the first time. Eleanor was also taken aback by her father-in-law's action. She instinctively took a step back, her heart in turmoil. General Thorne didn't even glance at his son's pathetic state. He stood tall, his chest heaving with anger, his tiger-like eyes glaring at him. His voice was a low growl, each word like a military command. "You animal, do you still have the face to call me Dad?" He pointed a trembling finger at Caleb. "The Thorne family does not have descendants who disgrace our name and dishonor the military like you. Do you know how despicable your actions are? You betrayed your wife's trust. You betrayed your oath under the flag. You betrayed my expectations. You are not worthy of wearing that uniform anymore." Each of his words was like a whip lashing at Caleb's pride and self-esteem. He knew this time it was really over. His father wasn't joking. After venting his anger on his son, General Thorne turned to Eleanor. The fury on his face instantly vanished, replaced by a look of deep apology and heartache. His voice softened. "Eleanor, it is I who have failed you. It is our Thorne family that has let you down." He looked her straight in the eye, his gaze upright and sincere. "I heard what that animal just said. You want a divorce, and I support you. You don't need to endure this injustice for anyone or anything. Even if our Thorne family loses face, we cannot let another family's daughter suffer such humiliation." His firm declaration was not just support for Eleanor. It was a final blow that crushed all of Caleb's hopes. He looked from his father to Eleanor, his eyes filled with desperation and panic. "Dad, no. We can't get a divorce. Dad, please help me," begged Eleanor. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong." He crawled to his father's feet, clutching his pant leg and pleading. General Thorne coldly kicked his hand away, his eyes filled with disgust. "You have no right to speak to me. From now until the unit makes its official decision, you are under house arrest. You are not to take a single step outside this door." Amidst the struggle between father and son, Eleanor said nothing. She quietly turned and walked toward the bedroom. She didn't want to watch any more of this tragicomic family drama. Her decision had been made, and nothing could change it. She opened the closet and took out the suitcase she had brought to this house 3 years ago. A suitcase once filled with hopes and dreams of a happy future. Now it was the only thing she would take with her as she left this hell. She didn't pack much, just a few sets of everyday clothes, her personal documents, and a couple of her favorite books. The expensive items and jewelry Caleb had bought her she didn't touch. She didn't want to take anything that reminded her of him. Her eyes fell on the wedding photo on the nightstand. In the picture, she and he were smiling brightly. She once thought that was the happiest smile of her life. Without a moment's hesitation, she picked up the frame and placed it face down on the table. 15 minutes later, Eleanor emerged from the bedroom with her suitcase. Seeing this, Caleb rushed to block her path, his eyes bloodshot. "Eleanor, where are you going? Don't go. I'm begging you, just give me one more chance." Eleanor didn't look at him, only saying coldly, "Move. I won't move. You can't leave." He stubbornly blocked her way. "Do you want to disgrace yourself even further?" General Thorne roared. "Get out of her way." Faced with his father's authority, Caleb, despite his reluctance, had no choice but to let go, watching helplessly as Eleanor pulled her suitcase and walked past him. The familiar scent of jasmine from her body brushed past his nose. Perhaps for the last time. As Eleanor reached the door, General Thorne called out Eleanor. She stopped but didn't turn back. "The bank card I gave you before, keep it and use it. The pin is your birthday. If you need anything, just call me." Eleanor was silent for a few seconds, then her voice came out softly. "Thank you, General. But I don't need it. I can take care of myself. Please take care of your health." With that, she opened the door, pulled her suitcase out, and stepped into the cold D.C. night. The door closing behind her also closed the chapter on 3 years of her youth filled with dreams and pain. The D.C. night was thick and cold. Eleanor pulled her small suitcase, walking aimlessly down a deserted street. The orange-yellow glow of the streetlights stretched her lonely shadow across the pavement. She had just left the house that was once her home, a place that now felt like a prison that had held 3 years of her youth captive. She wasn't crying, nor did she feel the overwhelming pain she had at first. Now her heart was filled with a frightening emptiness and a steely resolve. She didn't go to her parents' house in Georgetown. She didn't want them to worry, nor did she want to see the pity in their eyes. She needed to sort out this mess on her own. She found a clean hotel nearby and checked into a single room. The room was small but tidy, with a predominantly white color scheme that felt clean, but also incredibly cold. Eleanor put her suitcase down without bothering to open it. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked out at the city lights through the window. Thousands of glittering lights out there, but not one of them belonged to her. She knew she couldn't wallow in this misery for long. Caleb would certainly not let go easily, not because he loved her, but because of his career. He would try every trick to drag his feet to delay the divorce. She needed a professional, someone who could help her end this marriage quickly and decisively. Eleanor picked up her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and stopped at the name Chloe Davis. It was her best friend, an editor at a major fashion magazine, well-connected and incredibly resourceful. She took a deep breath and made the call. "Hello, Chloe, it's me." Her voice was a bit hoarse. On the other end, Chloe's voice was full of surprise, but she quickly sensed something was wrong. "Ellie, why are you calling me at this hour? What's wrong? Your voice sounds strange." Eleanor didn't beat around the bush. "I want a divorce. Do you know any good lawyers in this field? I need the best." Chloe was silent for a few seconds on the other end, seemingly processing this shocking information. She didn't ask for the reason, only said decisively, "I know someone. Give me a minute." Less than 5 minutes later, Eleanor's phone received a text from Chloe Julian Croft D.C., top lawyer for civil divorce cases, especially complex ones involving military or government figures. Nicknamed the Surgeon for his precision. Famous for being cold, rational, and extremely expensive, but he has never lost a case he's taken on. Here's his office number. I've already had my assistant schedule an appointment for you at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Hang in there, Ellie. Call me if you need anything. Eleanor looked at the name Julian Croft on the screen. Just hearing the nickname The Surgeon gave her a sliver of hope. The next morning, Eleanor chose a simple but professional-looking business outfit, applying light makeup to hide her exhaustion. At exactly 9 a.m., she arrived at Julian Croft's law firm, located on the 25th floor of a Class A office building on K Street. The office was designed in a minimalist style with a cold gray color scheme, not a single superfluous detail, just like the owner she had heard about. A young assistant led her into Julian's office. The man named Julian Croft was sitting behind a glossy ebony desk. He looked to be in his early 30s, wearing a perfectly tailored suit. He had a sharp, angular face and a high, straight nose. His eyes were hidden behind gold-rimmed glasses, giving him an intellectual look, but they exuded a sharp, distant air. He didn't look up immediately, still focused on a file, only giving a slight nod for her to sit in the chair opposite him. The atmosphere in the room was a bit oppressive. After a moment, he finally closed the file and looked up at her. His eyes swept over Eleanor, once a purely professional assessment devoid of any emotion. "Miss Thorne, you have 30 minutes. Please present your case." His voice was low, neither warm nor cold. Eleanor took a breath and placed her handbag beside her. She didn't cry, didn't launch into a long story about the pain of betrayal. She knew this man didn't have time for tears. "Mr. Croft, I want to divorce my husband, Caleb Thorne." She spoke calmly, her voice clear and articulate. "He is a major in the army. The reason for the divorce is his infidelity." She took out her phone, opened the video she had recorded the night before, and placed it on the desk, turning it to face him. "This is the evidence." Julian picked up the phone and watched the nearly 1-minute video. Throughout the process, his expression didn't change at all, as if he were watching a boring documentary. He put the phone down and looked at her. "Did he ever abuse you? Does he have any hidden assets?" "No physical abuse." "As for assets, I'm not sure, but it doesn't matter." Eleanor shook her head. And this was what truly caught Julian's attention. He raised an eyebrow, a hint of interest in his eyes. "Doesn't matter, Miss Thorne. You must know that your husband is the son of General Robert Thorne. The Thorne family's assets are not a small sum." "I know." Eleanor nodded, her gaze firm. "My request is simple. First, the divorce as quickly as possible. Second, I am not asking for any division of assets, including the apartment we live in. I just want my freedom." Only then did Julian truly look at the woman before him. He had handled too many divorce cases, seen too many wives crying and screaming, demanding assets and revenge. But a woman who held clear evidence of infidelity in a prestigious family yet was so frighteningly calm and asked only for freedom, this was a first. She didn't seem like a helpless victim, but like someone conducting a fair transaction. She wanted to trade assets for time and a swift release. The initial indifference in Julian's eyes gradually faded, replaced by a flicker of professional admiration. He liked working with people who were smart and knew what they wanted. "Are you sure?" he asked one last time. "Once this decision is made, it cannot be changed." "I'm sure," Eleanor replied without a hint of hesitation. Julian nodded. He took out a legal representation agreement. "Very well, I'll take your case. My fees are not cheap." "Money is not an issue," Eleanor said, signing her name on the contract. Her handwriting, like her personality, was elegant yet strong. When she finished signing, Julian stood up and extended his hand. "Hello, Miss Thorne. I'm Julian Croft. From now on, I am your lawyer. I will help you get your freedom in the shortest time possible." Eleanor stood up and shook his hand. His hand was dry and warm, conveying a strange sense of trust. It was the handshake that marked the beginning of a new path, the path to finding herself again. While Eleanor was seeking her way out, a real storm was crashing down on Caleb Thorne. The next morning, still under house arrest with a swollen cheek, his mind in utter chaos, he received a call from his unit's commanding officer, ordering him to report to his office immediately. The CO's tone over the phone was colder and more distant than ever. A bad feeling crept over him. Caleb hurriedly put on his uniform, trying to smooth it out to hide his disheveled state. He drove to the base in a state of unease. As soon as he entered the command headquarters, he felt an unusual atmosphere. His subordinates, who usually greeted him warmly, now looked at him with strange eyes, a mix of curiosity, contempt, and even pity. They whispered behind his back. The rumors had already begun to spread like an oil slick. A sense of humiliation washed over him. He kept his head down and walked quickly toward the commander's office. Inside, not only was the division commander present, but also the Judge Advocate General Jag and several officers from the disciplinary committee. The atmosphere was so solemn it was hard to breathe. The commander, an older colonel who had always appreciated his talent, now looked at him with utter disappointment. He didn't say much, just placed a tablet on the desk. The screen was displaying a video. It was the video Eleanor had filmed. Seeing the disgusting scene of himself on the screen, Caleb felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He couldn't stand steadily. His legs went weak. His father had really sent the video to the disciplinary committee. He hadn't been making an empty threat. Major Thorne, the JAG officer's voice was ice-cold and full of disciplinary weight. Do you have any explanation for this behavior? A serious violation of Article 134 of the UCMJ conduct, unbecoming of an officer and a negative impact on the image and prestige of the Army. Caleb's lips moved, but he couldn't utter a single word of defense. The evidence was too clear. Any explanation would be meaningless and ludicrous. In accordance with the disciplinary regulations of the U.S. Army, the commander spoke, his voice full of regret but also incredibly firm. The division has decided to suspend Major Caleb Thorne from his duties, pending the results of the investigation and official disciplinary action. During this time, you must hand over all your work, you are not permitted to leave the local area, and you must be present when summoned. Suspended from duties. Those 3 words were like 3 sledgehammer blows to his career and his pride. It was all over. He knew that for this offense, the lightest punishment would be a demotion, and the heaviest would be being stripped of his rank and forced out of the military. The brilliant military career he had poured so much sweat and effort into building had completely crumbled in a single night. He staggered out of the commander's office in silence, under the scrutinizing gazes of everyone. At the same time, Heather was also on pins and needles. She hadn't been able to contact Caleb since last night. When she went to the base to ask, she was met with only shaking heads and contemptuous looks. Finally, she managed to corner him in a secluded spot on the base. "Caleb, what on earth happened? Why is everyone looking at me like that?" Heather grabbed his sleeve, her voice panicked. Caleb was in the worst possible mood. Seeing Heather's face, the anger he had no outlet for suddenly erupted. It was all because of this woman. If it weren't for her, things wouldn't have gotten to this point. He violently shook her hand off, roaring in a rage. "You still have the nerve to ask me. It's all your fault. If you hadn't kept seducing me, if you hadn't been so demanding, I wouldn't be in this mess." Heather was stunned by his attitude. The gentle doting man of yesterday was gone, replaced by a coarse, resentful brute. What do you mean? Didn't you say you loved me, that you would divorce your wife and marry me?" Love, Caleb sneered, a twisted, bitter smile on his face. "You really think I love you? Take a look at yourself. Now I've lost everything. My career, my future, it's all been destroyed by you. Get the hell out of my sight." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Heather frozen in place. Only then did she realize with a shock that Caleb's so-called love was just a lie. When he was a high-ranking officer, he could give her everything. But when he lost it all, she was just a nuisance to be discarded without a second thought. Their relationship, built on selfishness and lust, had shattered in an instant. That afternoon, Caleb received a call from Julian Croft's law firm, requesting his presence to handle the divorce proceedings. He arrived at the law office looking like a wreck, his stubble-covered face and hollow eyes a testament to his state. He once again met Julian Croft, the cold-hearted lawyer he had heard of. Julian didn't waste any words, placing the meticulously prepared divorce papers in front of him. "Mr. Thorne, this is the divorce petition. Miss Thorne has already signed. Her request is simple, no dispute over any assets. Just sign and all procedures will be completed as quickly and discreetly as possible." Caleb looked at the petition. The fact that Eleanor wasn't demanding any assets felt like a final slap in the face, a contemptuous act of charity. It stripped him of his last excuse to delay or bargain. He was cornered with no other choice. His hand trembled as he picked up the pen. As he signed his name on the paper, his heart felt as if it were being crushed. He wasn't just signing the end of a marriage. He was signing the death warrant for his own career and honor. The Superior Court of the District of Columbia. The atmosphere inside the courtroom was solemn and cold, with only the steady hum of the ventilation fan and the emotionless voice of the judge. Eleanor sat with her back straight on the plaintiff's side. Beside her was her lawyer, Julian Croft, who maintained a calm and professional demeanor from start to finish. On the opposite side, Caleb sat alone. He looked much more haggard and gaunt than just a few days ago. The expensive civilian clothes he wore now seemed too large for him. His usually well-groomed hair was messy, and his eyes were sunken and dark-circled. He kept looking at Eleanor with a complex expression, a mix of regret, pleading, and a hint of resentment he couldn't hide. Thanks to Julian's thorough preparation and the fact that both parties had no disputes over assets or children, the hearing proceeded with surprising speed. The judge reviewed the evidence and submitted petitions, then asked the final procedural questions. Miss Thorne, are you certain you wish to dissolve your marriage to Mr. Caleb? Thorne. Eleanor did not hesitate. Her voice was clear and firm, echoing distinctly in the courtroom. I am certain, Mr. Thorne. Do you agree to this dissolution? Caleb's lips moved as if he wanted to say something in protest to hold on, but when he met Julian's sharp knife-like gaze, the words stuck in his throat. He knew any resistance now was futile. In the end, he could only lower his head and mutter a dry, hoarse "I agree" that sounded like it came from the depths of hell. The judge struck the small wooden gavel on the desk. The sound was decisive. The court grants the petition for the dissolution of marriage between Miss Eleanor Thorne and Mr. Caleb Thorne. From this day forward, you are no longer husband and wife. Everything ended swiftly and coldly. Eleanor received the divorce decree from the court clerk. The thin booklet felt weightless but carried an invisible gravity. The moment she held it, an immense sense of relief washed over her. It wasn't the joy of victory, nor was it happiness yet, but it was a true liberation. Like a long-imprisoned person finally freed from their shackles. 3 years of her youth buried in a deceitful marriage had finally come to an end. She and Julian walked out of the courtroom. Caleb hurried after them. Just as they stepped out of the courthouse main entrance, he rushed forward and grabbed Eleanor's arm. Eleanor, wait. Julian frowned slightly, about to intervene, but Eleanor signaled for him to stop. She calmly removed Caleb's hand from her arm, her movement gentle but firm. Is there something else, Mr. Thorne? She called him Mr. Thorne, a clear and formal distance. Caleb looked at her, his eyes filled with desperation. He had lost the arrogance of a military major. Now he was just a pathetic failure. Eleanor, I know I was wrong. I truly regret it. Can you give me one last chance, can we? Can we start over? I promise I'll never do it again. His words sounded pitiful, but to Eleanor now they were just a clumsy act. She looked him straight in the eye without hatred or contempt, only a chilling indifference. That indifference was more painful than any hatred. It's too late, Caleb. Her voice was as calm as a rippleless lake. Everything between us ended that night. You don't need to apologize to me. The person you should be apologizing to is yourself. Live the rest of your life well. With that, she gave him no chance to say anything more decisively, turning and walking away. Her back was straight and resolute. She never once looked back. Just then, a light drizzle began to fall from the sky. The fine, cold raindrops drifted in the wind, seeping into the skin. Eleanor looked up at the gray sky and shivered slightly. Suddenly, the space above her head was shielded. The rain no longer fell on her shoulders. She turned to see that Julian had come to her side at some point. He said nothing, just quietly opened a large black umbrella sheltering them both. The umbrella was tilted significantly toward her while one side of his suit jacket was already dotted with rain. He didn't look at her, just stared straight ahead, walking with her through the drizzle. This silent gesture, this wordless protection gave Eleanor a strange sense of security in the vast cold city. Under the black umbrella, it seemed as if all the storms were kept at bay. After the divorce, Eleanor didn't allow herself time to grieve. She used the small savings she had from her translation work before marriage to rent a small studio apartment in an old brownstone in DuPont Circle. This place was far from the sterile military compound and its painful memories. The apartment wasn't large, but it had a sunny bay window, and most importantly, it was hers alone. The first few days, she threw all her energy into cleaning and arranging her new living space. She repainted the discolored walls herself, bought simple but cozy furniture online, and spent an entire afternoon organizing her bookshelf, her most precious possession. The process of building a true home for herself just the way she wanted it had a surprisingly healing effect. With each small corner she completed, she felt herself slowly finding her way back to the independent, self-reliant person she once was. The next step was to return to work. Eleanor contacted Mrs. Albright, the editor-in-chief of the academic press where she used to work. Mrs. Albright was an older woman who greatly admired Eleanor's talent and diligence. When she heard that Eleanor wanted to come back to work, she couldn't hide her delight. Eleanor, you finally saw the light. I told you it's such a waste for your talent to be cooped up at home as a housewife. Come back, we always have a place for you. Mrs. Albright immediately assigned her a new project, translating a contemporary novel by a best-selling British author. Immersing herself back in the world of words and literature, Eleanor felt like a fish in water. The work not only gave her an income, but more importantly, it gave her a sense of purpose and the self-confidence she had long lost. She worked tirelessly, often staying up late, but felt incredibly fulfilled. Of course, the new life wasn't always easy. The long, quiet nights sometimes made her feel lonely. Occasionally, an old song or a familiar scent would bring back painful memories like an undercurrent. She also had to face gossip. A few of the officers' wives she used to know saw her at the supermarket and looked at her with a mix of curiosity and pity. They tried to pry, but Eleanor just smiled politely and found an excuse to leave. She learned to ignore the harsh words and maintain her composure. Her best friend Chloe was her greatest emotional support during this time. She called almost every day and brought delicious food over on the weekends. One weekend evening, after a full day of work, Eleanor went down to the corner store to buy some groceries. On her way back, she was carrying a heavy bag, including a large jug of milk. As she was fumbling for her keys at the building entrance, the bag shifted, and she nearly dropped it. "Let me help you." A familiar, deep voice sounded beside her. A large, strong hand gently took the bag from her. Eleanor looked up so surprised she was speechless. The person who had helped her was none other than Julian Croft. He wasn't in a suit, just a simple gray t-shirt and casual pants, looking much younger and more approachable. "Mr. Croft, what are you doing here?" she stammered. Julian gave a slight shrug, a rare smile gracing his lips. "I live in the building across the street." "What a coincidence." Eleanor looked at the more upscale building on the other side of the road. It was indeed an unbelievable coincidence. "Thank you," she said, reaching for the bag, but he held on to it. "It's nothing. Which floor are you on?" "The third floor." He said nothing more, simply carrying the bag and walking with her up the stairs. The atmosphere was a little awkward, but not uncomfortable. He helped her carry the bag all the way to her apartment door. "Thank you so much, Mr. Croft," Eleanor said apologetically. "Just call me Julian." "We're neighbors after all," he said, setting the bag down. He gave her a slight nod and left. His presence after that was never abrupt or intrusive. Occasionally, they would run into each other in the parking garage or at the small coffee shop near their homes where Eleanor often worked. He never brought up her divorce or pried into her private life. They would just make small talk about the weather or a good book. Once the faucet in her kitchen started leaking, she mentioned it casually when she saw him in the hallway. Unexpectedly, half an hour later, he showed up with a toolbox and fixed it for her. His concern was subtle and appropriate. He treated her not like a pitiful former client, but like a normal neighbor. This silent respect was the best medicine, helping Eleanor gradually rebuild her self-esteem and her faith in life. The truth, as they say, will always out. After nearly 2 weeks of investigation, the military's disciplinary committee reached its final verdict. Caleb was summoned to the division headquarters this time, not as a major with a bright future, but as a criminal, awaiting judgment. He put on his uniform for the last time, carefully ironing every crease and polishing his military boots until he could see his reflection. The more he tried to appear presentable, the more pathetic he felt. Looking in the mirror, he no longer recognized the proud, confident man within. Instead, he saw a failure with sunken eyes and a face gray with anxiety. When he arrived, the atmosphere in the meeting room was as heavy as lead. The division commander and the JAG officer sat at the head table, their faces expressionless. There were no lectures or scoldings, only the coldness of military discipline. The JAG officer stood up holding a document and read the final decision aloud. His voice was monotonous without a hint of emotion, but every word he spoke was like a hammer blow to Caleb's life. Based on the results of the investigation and the severity of the disciplinary violation, the command has decided to strip Major Caleb Thorne of his rank and dishonorably discharge him from the United States Army. This decision is effective as of the date of signing. Stripped of his rank, dishonorably discharged. The 8 short, ice-cold words officially ended his 12-year military career. 12 years of sweat, tears, and even blood to earn the major's oak leaf on his shoulder. 12 years of relentless effort to escape his father's shadow and prove his own worth. Now it had all turned to ash. "Mr. Thorne, please hand over your rank insignia, military emblems, and officer ID." Caleb stood frozen, a ringing in his ears. He barely heard the final command. It wasn't until a military police officer beside him gently nudged him that he snapped back to reality. Trembling, he reached for his shoulder where the gold oak leaf of a major was still shining. It had once been his pride, his very life. His fingers were stiff. It took him a long time to remove the insignia. The moment he placed it on the red velvet-lined tray held by the officer, he felt something inside him die. He surrendered everything, his officer ID, his official seal, everything that proved his identity as a soldier. Now he was just an ordinary citizen, an outcast of the army. He walked out of the headquarters like a man who had lost his soul. The uniform on his body suddenly felt heavy and foreign. He no longer had the right to wear it. He was a stain, a disgrace. Caleb returned to the cold apartment. Eleanor was gone, and she had taken all the warmth of this home with her. He collapsed onto the sofa, looking around the empty room. An unprecedented sense of despair washed over him. The door was unlocked. Heather pushed it open and walked in. She had heard the news and came to confirm it. Seeing his dazed state, she knew the answer. But what she cared about was not his pain. "Caleb, I heard they kicked you out of the army," Heather said, her voice trembling slightly. Caleb didn't even bother to look up, just grunted in affirmation. This confirmation sent Heather into a real panic. She had attached herself to him, not for love but for the status of being a future major's wife for the upscale life he could provide. Now that he had lost everything, what was left? An unemployed man rejected by his family and society. Then, what about me? She blurted out, her voice full of accusation. You promised me a future. You said you would divorce your wife to marry me to make me Mrs. Thorne. Now that it's come to this, what am I supposed to do? Hearing these words, Caleb finally looked up. He looked at the woman he was once infatuated with, the woman for whom he had lost everything. Now in his eyes, her beautiful face looked shameless and disgusting. He suddenly burst into laughter, a wild, bitter laugh that echoed through the empty room, chillingly eerie. A future, a future, he laughed as he pointed at himself. Look at me. I don't even have a future. What can I possibly give you, Mrs. Thorne? Wake up. He shot up from the sofa, his despair turning into a mad rage. He pulled out his wallet, took all the cash inside, a few $100s, and threw it in Heather's face. The bills flew everywhere, landing at her feet. Take this money and get out, he roared, his eyes as red as a wounded beast's. This is all I can give you. Get out now, and don't you ever show your face to me again. Heather was terrified, but she didn't forget to bend down and pick up the money from the floor. She said nothing, just hastily gathered the bills and ran out of the apartment as if fleeing a plague, never once looking back. The door slammed shut. Caleb stood alone in the room, enveloped in a frightening silence. Now he truly had nothing left. Wife, career, lover, honor, all gone. He was a man with nothing in the truest sense of the word. He staggered to the liquor cabinet, grabbed a bottle of strong spirits, and started chugging. The burning alcohol seared his brain, but it couldn't numb the pain and humiliation gnawing at his soul. He slid to the cold floor, his back against the sofa, clutching the bottle, and sank into an endless drunken stupor. While Caleb's life was sinking to its lowest depths, Eleanor's life was beginning to show the first signs of a new spring, like a green sprout pushing through barren soil after a storm. She poured her heart into translating the novel, The Blue Sands. Every sentence, every word was carefully polished and refined. She didn't just translate the meaning. She tried to convey the soul and emotion of the author so that American readers could fully experience the beauty of the work. The work helped her forget the unpleasant past, and more importantly, it helped her rediscover her passion and self-worth. Every time she finished a chapter, a small sense of accomplishment blossomed in her heart, helping her gradually rebuild the confidence that had been buried for the past 3 years. Finally, after nearly a month of working day and night, she completed the final manuscript and sent it to the publishing house. Sending that email felt like letting go of a heavy burden. A few days later, she received a call from Mrs. Albright, the editor-in-chief. Eleanor, I just finished reading your manuscript. Mrs. Albright's voice was filled with unconcealed joy and excitement. My goodness, it's brilliant. You didn't just translate it accurately and beautifully. You truly breathed life into the work. I feel like I'm reading a masterpiece written in my native tongue. You did an amazing job, Eleanor. Truly amazing. The sincere praise from a professional like Mrs. Albright was like a warm current flowing into Eleanor's slowly reviving heart. This was recognition for her talent and effort, recognition that had nothing to do with her status as a major's wife or a daughter-in-law of the Thorne family. For the first time in a long time, she felt proud of herself. Thank you, ma'am. I just tried to do my best, she replied humbly, but she couldn't stop the corners of her lips from curving into a radiant smile. Just you wait. The book will be released soon. I'm sure it's going to be a bestseller. After hanging up, Eleanor stood by the window, looking down at the bustling traffic below. She took a deep breath, her chest filling with a sense of freedom and hope. The road ahead might still have thorns, but she knew she was on the right path. To change her environment, Eleanor often took her laptop to a small, quiet coffee shop near her home to work. The shop had large glass windows overlooking a row of green trees, an ideal space for focus and inspiration. And it was here that her chance encounters with Julian became more frequent. He also had a habit of coming here in the afternoon, ordering a black coffee with no sugar and working on his computer in a corner. At first, they just nodded to each other like polite neighbors. His presence didn't make her uncomfortable. On the contrary, having a cold, serious lawyer working in the corner seemed to make the space feel safer and more orderly. Gradually, they began to have short conversations. Nice weather today, or the coffee here is quite good. Meaningless small talk, but it helped break the ice between them. Until one afternoon, Eleanor wasn't working but was reading a book for herself, the legal classic To Kill a Mockingbird. Julian walked past her table to get some sugar. He happened to glance at the book cover and paused. An interesting choice, he commented, his voice still low but with a hint of warmth. That's one of my favorite books too. Eleanor looked up a little surprised. Really, I love it too. I've read it many times. And so their first real conversation began not about her divorce, not about dry legal clauses, but about literature. Which character do you like the most? He asked, leaning against the nearby counter. Atticus Finch, of course, Eleanor replied without hesitation. Her eyes lit up as she spoke about her favorite topic. I admire his integrity, his courage, and the way he taught his children about what's right about justice, even when facing the prejudices of an entire town." Julian nodded, his eyes showing his agreement. "Yes, Atticus Finch is an ideal for many in the legal profession. But I also have a different perspective on Mrs. Dubose, the old woman addicted to morphine." Their conversation flowed from the characters in the book to issues of justice, human nature, and the difference between law and morality. Eleanor was completely captivated. She discovered that behind Julian's cold, distant exterior was a sharp mind, a logical and rigorous way of thinking, but also one that was deep and humane. He wasn't just a good lawyer. He was a man of knowledge with a rich soul. It had been a long time since she had such an interesting and resonant conversation. Julian also seemed very engaged. He listened to her attentively, occasionally making sharp comments that made her think. He wasn't condescending or showing off his knowledge. He was conversing with her as a true intellectual equal. When the barista came to inform them that the shop was closing, they were startled to realize they had been talking for nearly 2 hours. They walked out of the coffee shop together. The night breeze was gentle and cool. "It was very nice talking to you today," Julian said, his voice completely sincere. "I hope we can do it again sometime." "Me too," Eleanor smiled. She watched his figure walk toward the building across the street, a strange warmth sprouting in her heart. It wasn't love at first sight, but a small spark of connection, of a meeting of minds, a spark that promised to warm her still cold future. The upscale apartment that was once Caleb Thorne's pride and joy had now turned into a cold, dark den. The curtains were always drawn, blocking out all sunlight. The air was thick with the smell of cheap, hard liquor and moldy food. Empty bottles and fast food containers were strewn across the floor. The man who was once a sharp, clean-cut military major was now drowning in filth and depravity. Caleb drank. He drank non-stop, drinking to forget the harsh reality. He had been stripped of his rank, kicked out of the army, and become an unemployed man despised by society. He drank to forget the look of utter disappointment in his father's eyes, the whispers of his former comrades, the shameless face of Heather. But the more he drank, the more sober he felt. The drunker he got, the more vividly the memories of Eleanor returned, haunting him with a painful clarity. In his drunken haze, he seemed to see her figure diligently cleaning the house, organizing the mess he made. He saw her in an apron, cooking in the kitchen, the delicious aroma filling the home. He saw her sitting quietly on the sofa, carefully ironing every wrinkle out of his uniform. Before, he had always taken her existence for granted. Her care, her sacrifices, he saw them all as a wife's duty. He never truly looked into her eyes to see her exhaustion, never truly listened to understand her worries. He just selfishly and thoughtlessly took. Now that everything was gone, he finally realized what he had lost was not just a wife, not just an unpaid housekeeper. He had lost the only warmth in this home, lost the only woman in the world who had loved him unconditionally. This belated regret was like a venomous snake gnawing at his conscience day and night, causing him a pain so intense he could barely breathe. One night, after downing the last bottle of liquor in the house, his drunken state couldn't quell the gnawing loneliness. He wanted to see her. He had to see her. He wanted to tell her he was wrong, to beg for her forgiveness. He staggered to his feet, grabbed his car keys, and rushed out the door. The luxury car sped through the night like a wounded animal, ignoring red lights and the blaring horns around it. But where could he find her? He unconsciously drove back to the old military complex. The lights in their apartment were off, cold and lifeless as a tomb. He knew she wasn't there anymore. He slammed his fist on the steering wheel, a sense of utter helplessness overwhelming him. That's right, her parents' house. He suddenly remembered the address of his former in-laws' home, an old brownstone for Georgetown University faculty. He quickly turned the car around and drove like a madman. It was well past midnight when he arrived. He parked under the building and looked up. The apartment on the 3rd floor had a dim, soft light in the window. His heart pounded. Is she there? He jumped out of the car and ran into the building. He didn't wait for the elevator, just ran up the 3 flights of stairs. He stood before the familiar wooden door, panting, his breath reeking of alcohol. He raised his hand to knock, but his arm froze in midair. What would he say? How would he face her parents? The 2 respected professors he once held in high regard. How could he explain what he had done to their daughter? Cowardice made him hesitate. Just then, the door of the opposite apartment opened. An elderly woman with white hair looked at him suspiciously. Who are you looking for? I'm looking for Eleanor. Is she home? Caleb stammered, his voice hoarse. The old woman squinted at him for a long moment as if recognizing him. You're Caleb, Eleanor's husband, right? You 2 are divorced. She's not here. She moved out to live on her own. Didn't want to bother the professors. Not here. Moved out. His last hope crumbled. He had no idea where she was. In a city as vast as D.C., where could he possibly find her? Thank you, he mumbled, then turned and staggered back down the stairs. The old woman watched his lonely, stumbling figure, sighed softly, and closed her door. Caleb stepped out of the building into the cold night. The wind made him shiver. The alcohol seemed to have worn off slightly, leaving only a painful sobriety. He looked up at the starless sky, an unprecedented feeling of emptiness and despair washing over him. For the first time in his life, he truly understood what he had lost. It wasn't his career, not his reputation, but a woman named Eleanor. He had pushed her out of his life with his own hands, and now he would probably never find her again. The tears of a broken man finally uncontrollably rolled down his haggard cheeks. Eleanor was focused on finishing a short translation for a literary magazine when her phone rang. Seeing a strange but familiar number on the screen, she frowned slightly. It was the landline from the Thorne family villa. Her heart skipped a beat. Had Caleb caused more trouble? She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello, Eleanor, is that you, my child?" The voice on the other end wasn't Caleb's, but a familiar deep voice that sounded somewhat weary. It was General Robert Thorne. Eleanor was a little surprised. "Yes, it's me. Hello, General." She still habitually called him by his title, a respectful but now distant form of address. "Don't call me General. Thorne's voice seemed to carry a sigh. "If you don't mind an old man like me, just call me Robert like you used to." This statement made Eleanor a bit flustered. She fell silent, unsure how to respond. General Thorne seemed to sense her discomfort and didn't press the issue. "Are you free tomorrow night? I'd like to treat you to a meal, just the two of us." "Please don't refuse. Consider it a final favor for this old man." His voice lacked the command of a general, holding only the sincerity of an elder. Eleanor really couldn't find a reason to refuse. After all, during her time as his daughter-in-law, he was the only one who had treated her well. During the recent storm, it was he who had stood by her side without hesitation. Yes, of course. What time and where? She finally agreed. Wonderful. 7 p.m. Tomorrow at the Dabney. I've already booked a private room. I'll have a car pick you up. Oh, no need, sir. I can get there myself, Eleanor quickly declined. She didn't want any further entanglement. General Thorne didn't insist. All right then. I'll see you tomorrow night. The next evening, Eleanor arrived at the Dabney on time. It was a luxurious restaurant specializing in classic American cuisine, a place Caleb used to occasionally take her for social functions. Stepping into the familiar space, her heart stirred slightly, but she quickly suppressed it. General Thorne was already waiting in a quiet private room. He was in civilian clothes, looking more like a normal father than an imposing general. Seeing her arrive, he stood up, a kind smile on his face. "You're here. Have a seat." Eleanor bowed politely and sat down opposite him. The meal proceeded in a rather quiet atmosphere. General Thorne kept serving her food, all her old favorites. He asked about her work and her new place in a very natural way, like a father concerned about his daughter. Eleanor answered politely and reservedly. After they finished eating and hot tea was served, General Thorne put down his teacup and looked at her with a complex expression. "Eleanor, the reason I asked you here today is first I want to once again formally apologize to you. It is our Thorne family that has wronged you. It was that rebellious son of mine who betrayed your sincere love." His voice was low, filled with apology. Eleanor shook her head slightly. "It's all in the past, Robert. Please don't bring it up again." She had naturally called him Robert. General Thorne seemed very pleased by this. He nodded and sighed softly. "Him? Caleb. He's been discharged from the army." Eleanor was silent. She had expected this news, but hearing it from her former father-in-law's own lips still gave her a strange feeling. Not joy or schadenfreude, but a sense of sorrow for a talent who had destroyed his own future. General Thorne saw her calm expression. He knew she was a sensible child. He continued, his voice like a weary lament. "I didn't call you here to plead for him. He doesn't deserve it. He brought this on himself. It's just seeing him live day by day like a soulless man drowning in alcohol. It truly breaks my heart. I was strict with him my whole life, hoping he would succeed, only for him to end up like this." He didn't cry, but in the old general's eyes wrinkled with crow's feet, Eleanor could see the helplessness and pain of a father. He didn't elaborate much, just a few short sentences, but it was enough to paint a bleak picture of Caleb's current situation. Eleanor just listened silently. She didn't know what to say, nor could she say anything. She couldn't offer comfort or make promises. Any pity at this point would be insincere. Seeing her silence, General Thorne didn't talk about his son anymore. He changed the subject, telling her to take care of herself, not to work too hard, and to let him know if she needed anything. The meal ended, and General Thorne walked her to the restaurant entrance. "Eleanor, in the future, can you come visit this old man? Sometimes I truly see you as my own daughter." Eleanor looked into the hopeful eyes of the elderly man before her, and finally gave a slight nod. "Yes, I will. You take care of your health too, Robert." With that, she bowed to him one last time, and walked away. Her figure grew smaller and disappeared into the bustling crowd. General Thorne stood there for a long time, a mix of comfort and bitter sorrow in his heart. He knew that his Thorne family was no longer fortunate enough to keep such a good woman. After the meal with General Thorne, Eleanor's life returned to its peaceful routine. She focused on her work occasionally, met up with her best friend Chloe, and her conversations with Julian at the coffee shop became more natural and frequent. Their relationship remained at the level of neighbors and intellectual friends, but an invisible bond was gradually forming. Meanwhile, Caleb, after a period of drowning in alcohol, was finally forced to face reality. His savings had run out. He couldn't live by wallowing in the past forever. Under his father's pressure, he was forced to look for a job. But with a record of being dishonorably discharged, no decent company or organization would hire him. Finally, through one of his father's old connections, he managed to find a job as a logistics coordinator in a small company in a suburban industrial park. The pay was meager, the work was boring, and there was no future. From a respected military major to a mediocre office worker taking orders from his superiors, the chasm between his past and present life grated on his self-esteem every single day. The torment and regret morphed into an obsession, a sick fixation on Eleanor. He started to see her as his only lifeline, the only thing that could prove he wasn't a complete failure. He had to get her back at any cost. He began to stalk her. He found out about her new apartment complex, the coffee shop she frequented. He would often park his car in a hidden corner watching her from afar. He saw her working, reading, and laughing happily with her best friend. The brighter her smile, the more it felt like acid corroding his heart. He couldn't accept it. Why should he suffer while she was living so well after leaving him? And then he saw her with Julian. He saw them walking out of the coffee shop together, talking and laughing. He saw the smile on Eleanor's face when she talked to that man, a natural, relaxed smile he hadn't seen in a long time when he was her husband. He saw the way Julian looked at her, an attentive gaze that with a man's intuition he knew was more than just a lawyer's concern for a former client. A sick, jealous fire erupted in his heart. He concluded that Eleanor had been cheating on him all along, that Julian was the reason she had been so decisive about the divorce. His selfishness and possessiveness made him forget that he was the one who had cheated first, that they were no longer anything to each other. One evening, as Eleanor was walking home from the publishing house on a quiet street leading to her apartment complex, Caleb suddenly drove up and blocked her path. The car screeched to a halt. Eleanor jumped back. The car door opened and Caleb got out reeking of alcohol. "Eleanor," he called her name, his voice hoarse and full of anger. Eleanor frowned, a feeling of disgust rising within her. "What are you doing here? Get out of my way!" "I won't move." He stepped forward to block her, his bloodshot eyes staring at her. "Tell me what's going on between you and that lawyer, Croft. Were you two seeing each other before we even divorced? Huh, is it because of him that you so heartlessly threw me away?" His absurd and rude accusations stunned Eleanor, and then her own anger flared. She couldn't believe this man could be so shameless. "Caleb, are you insane?" she retorted, her voice as cold as ice. "What right do you have to question me? You should remember, we are divorced. Who I see as my freedom, and it has nothing to do with you. You were the one who cheated. You were the one who betrayed me. Don't you dare try to slander me." "I don't believe you," he roared, reaching out to grab her shoulder. "You are my wife. You will always be my woman. Don't you dare get involved with another man." Just as his hand was about to touch Eleanor, a strong arm shot out and stopped him. Julian had appeared out of nowhere. He had just been coming home from work and happened to see the scene. He stood in front of Eleanor, his tall frame, completely shielding her from Caleb's view. "Mr. Thorne, I think you should calm down." Julian's voice was steady without a trace of anger, but it carried a pressure that commanded respect. "First, Miss Vance and you are no longer legally married. You have no right to interfere in her private life. Second, your current harassment can be prosecuted as a criminal offense. As a lawyer, I advise you to stop before things go too far." Caleb looked at Julian, his jealousy and insecurity making him lose all reason. "Who the hell are you to meddle in my business? You think you're so great because you're a lawyer? It was you. You're the one who stole my wife." He threw a punch at Julian, but with his quick reflexes, Julian easily dodged it. He didn't fight back, simply using one hand to grip Caleb's wrist, squeezing so tightly that it sent a sharp pain through him. "I don't want to resort to violence," Julian said, looking straight into his eyes, his gaze sharp and cold. "But if you dare touch her again, I can't guarantee I will always remain calm. Now, I suggest you leave immediately." Julian's sharp logic, composed demeanor, and commanding presence completely overpowered Caleb. He was like an aggressive house dog facing a true alpha wolf. In front of Eleanor, he didn't want to look even more pathetic. He gritted his teeth, wrenched his hand free, and shot them both a hateful glare. "Fine. Just fine. Eleanor, you just remember this. You will regret it." With that, he got back in his car and sped off like a sore loser, leaving behind a cloud of black smoke and a trail of bitter humiliation. After he was gone, Julian turned to Eleanor, his voice softening. "Are you okay?" Eleanor was still a little shaken, but she tried to compose herself and shook her head. "I'm fine. Thank you. He won't give up that easily. Starting tomorrow, I'll take you to and from work," he said, not as a question but as a statement. The novel The Blue Sands, translated by Eleanor, was finally released after a period of careful preparation. Contrary to her initial worries, the book was an immediate sensation. Eleanor's smooth, emotional, and poetic translation completely won over even the most demanding readers. The book sold extremely well, consistently ranking among the week's bestsellers. The name of the translator, Eleanor Vance, also began to gain attention from critics and readers alike. Riding the wave of success, the publishing house decided to organize a book talk and Q&A session with the translator at a large bookstore in the city center. This was the first time Eleanor would appear before the public as a professional translator. Initially, she was very nervous, but Chloe and Julian were there to encourage her. Chloe, with her experience as a fashion editor, helped her choose an elegant jade green dress that complemented her fair skin and slender figure. She also helped with light makeup, just enough to hide her fatigue and highlight her delicate features. When Eleanor looked at herself in the mirror, she almost didn't recognize herself. Gone was the image of the plain housewife with her hair tied up in the kitchen. In front of her was a beautiful intellectual woman who exuded a radiant confidence from deep within. The book talk was a resounding success. The bookstore's event hall was packed with readers, mostly young literature lovers. Eleanor, after a few minutes of initial awkwardness, quickly found her confidence. She shared insights about her translation process, the challenges, and the interesting moments she had while working on the book. Her voice was gentle and captivating, her literary knowledge was extensive, and her intelligent, witty way of speaking completely charmed the audience. She stood on the stage under the bright lights, confidently answering every question. Her eyes sparkled with joy and passion. In that moment, she was truly shining. She was no longer Caleb Thorne's shadow, no longer the Thorne family's daughter-in-law. She was Eleanor Vance, the translator, an independent and talented individual. In a discreet corner of the audience, Julian sat quietly from the beginning to the end of the event. He had turned down an important meeting to be here. He didn't want to draw attention, just to silently watch her, to witness the moment she rediscovered her own brilliance. He looked at the woman shining on the stage, a complex emotion swelling in his heart. He had first met her as a heartbroken wife, betrayed and in pain, but still clinging to her last bit of rationality. He had watched her bravely overcome the collapse of her life, rebuilding everything from scratch. And today he saw her standing here beautiful, confident, radiant, like a phoenix reborn from the ashes. He realized at some point he had become deeply attracted to this woman. It wasn't just admiration for her strength, but a deeper stirring, a special concern he had never felt for anyone before. He wanted to protect her, to see this smile on her face every day. The event ended and readers rushed to the stage for autographs. Eleanor was surrounded by fans, patiently signing books and taking photos. When the crowd finally thinned, she wearily sat down to rest. Chloe ran up and hugged her tightly. "Amazing, Ellie. You were fantastic. I'm so proud of you." "Thank you," Eleanor smiled happily. She glanced around, searching, but she didn't see Julian. A flicker of disappointment touched her heart. "Didn't he say he would come?" "Looking for someone?" Chloe asked slyly. "No, nothing," Eleanor quickly shook her head. As they were packing up to leave a bookstore, employee brought over a large bouquet of white roses. "Miss Vance, someone sent these for you." Eleanor accepted the bouquet, surprised. The pure, gentle scent of white roses filled the air. Tucked inside was a small card with no sender's name, only a single line written in a strong, flowing hand she recognized immediately. "Congratulations on finding your own sky again." Eleanor smiled involuntarily, a truly sweet and happy smile. She held the bouquet to her chest, feeling the warmth spread from her heart. She knew he had been there. He was always there, quietly watching and supporting her. And that was enough. After the incident with Caleb, Julian kept his word. Every morning he would wait for her in the lobby of her building, using the excuse of being on the same route to drive her to the publishing house. In the evening, his familiar car would be parked across the street. Eleanor tried to refuse a few times, but to no avail, so she accepted his warm arrangement. She knew this was no longer just the concern of a simple neighbor. There was a subtle shift in the air between them, a sweet awkwardness that both of them recognized but neither of them mentioned. One Friday evening, as the car stopped in front of her building, Julian didn't turn off the engine as usual. He turned to her, his voice steady. "Do you have any plans for this weekend?" "Me? Oh, nothing special. Probably just stay home, read and review some manuscripts," Eleanor said, feeling a little flustered by the change in their dynamic. Julian smiled faintly. "I have 2 tickets to an art exhibition by a modern painter at a gallery in Charleston. I thought you might like it." Eleanor was surprised. Charleston was a city she'd always wanted to visit. "Really, tickets to that exhibition are very hard to get. A former client gave them to me," he explained briefly. "So I'll pick you up tomorrow at 2 p.m. It was an invitation she couldn't refuse. Their unofficial first date took place in a spacious art gallery filled with natural light. The atmosphere was quiet and artistic, a world away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Eleanor wore a tasteful floral dress, her hair let down naturally. She seemed to blend into the space. Her intellectual and gentle beauty was almost more captivating than the paintings on the walls. They walked slowly, side by side, admiring each piece. Julian proved to have a deep understanding of art. He commented not just on technique and color, but also analyzed the stories and emotions hidden in each painting. Eleanor listened, captivated occasionally, offering her own subtle interpretations from a literary perspective. Their conversation flowed naturally with an incredible sense of harmony. She discovered that with him, she could be herself, freely sharing her thoughts without reservation. When they stopped in front of a large painting of a lone ship battling a stormy sea, Eleanor finally asked a question that had been on her mind for a long time. "Julian, why did you choose to become a divorce lawyer? It seems like a job where you have to witness so many broken relationships and the dark side of human nature. It doesn't seem to fit someone who loves art like you do." Julian looked at the painting in silence for a long moment, his gaze distant. Then he turned to her, a depth in his eyes she had never seen before. "Can we sit outside for a bit?" he asked, gesturing to a bench on a balcony overlooking a small garden. They sat down together. In the quiet space, only the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves could be heard. "Because of my mother," Julian finally said, his voice low and raspy. "My parents divorced when I was 15. It was a bitter, hateful divorce. They fought over assets, over custody, using every dirty trick to hurt each other in court." Eleanor fell silent, shocked that he had such a past. She just listened quietly. "My mother was a traditional woman. She sacrificed her career to take care of the family. When they divorced, she had almost nothing. My father's lawyer used every means to portray her as an emotionally unstable woman, unfit to raise a child. I had to watch my mother break down, crying her eyes out night after night." He paused, taking a deep breath. "In that moment, I made a vow to myself. When I grew up, I would become a lawyer. Not to make a lot of money, but to help women like my mother, the vulnerable ones in a broken marriage, to find justice and dignity. I wanted to help them get a clean break so they could start a new life instead of being drowned in hatred." Now Eleanor understood. She understood why he had such a cold, rational exterior. It was a shield to maintain his composure and objectivity when dealing with tragic stories every day. But deep inside that shell was a warm, compassionate heart. She also understood why he had taken her case, why he had respected her decision to not ask for assets. She looked at him, a complex emotion swelling in her heart, a mix of empathy, admiration, and a pang of sadness for the 15-year-old boy he once was. Seeing her silence, Julian turned to look directly into her eyes. He reached out and gently took her hand. His hand was warm and steady, giving her an absolute sense of security. "Eleanor," he said. Her name, his voice gentle but incredibly sincere. "The first time I met you in my office, I was very impressed. You were stronger and more rational than any woman I had ever met. As I got to know you, I realized that behind that strength was a pure and kind soul." He squeezed her hand gently. "I've seen you in pain, I've seen you struggle, and I've seen you reborn more radiant than ever. I don't want you to walk the rest of your path alone." He looked deep into her eyes, every word coming from the bottom of his heart. "Eleanor, you deserve to be happy. And I hope that I can be the one to bring you that happiness." The logistics company was located in a dusty and noisy industrial park on the outskirts of the city. Caleb sat in front of an old computer, mindlessly typing in boring shipping numbers. The smell of the old air conditioner mixed with sweat and the office noise made him feel suffocated. He glanced at the clock, just wishing the day would end so he could go to a bar. His life was now just a meaningless, tedious loop. By day, a lowly clerk taking orders. By night, a companion to alcohol and loneliness. The image of Eleanor happy with Julian haunted him, like a ghost tormenting him to the point of madness. Just then, a familiar figure appeared at the office door. It was Heather. She looked completely different. Gone were the tight designer dresses and sharp makeup. Instead, she wore a loose maternity dress, her unadorned face pale and haggard. She stood timidly at the door, and when she saw Caleb, her eyes immediately reddened with tears. Her appearance caused a stir in the small office. Everyone looked at them curiously. Caleb felt a wave of humiliation. He shot up from his chair, dragged Heather out into the hallway and hissed, "What are you doing here? I told you to get lost." But Heather said nothing, just sobbed, her tears falling onto his hand. Trembling, she placed her hand on her visibly swollen belly. I'm pregnant," she choked out. "It's your child, Caleb." Caleb felt as if he'd been struck by lightning. He stared in disbelief at Heather's belly, then back at her tear-streaked face. Pregnant, his child. For a moment, his mind went blank. After being kicked out by Caleb, Heather's life hadn't improved. Her new lover, a wealthy director, had dumped her after he grew tired of her. With all her financial support cut off, she quickly fell into poverty. In her desperation, she came up with this final plan. The baby in her belly was actually the director's, but he had denied all responsibility. She had no other choice but to turn to Caleb, hoping to cling to this last lifeline. "I've been to the doctor. I'm over 3 months along." Heather continued her act, her voice full of sorrow. "After I left you, I found out. I was going to raise the baby alone, not bother you. But I can't do it. I have no money, no job. How can the baby and I survive?" She looked up at him, her large, tear-filled eyes looking incredibly pitiful. "Caleb, I know you're struggling too. I'm not asking for much. I just need you to give me and our child a place to stay. I don't need a title. I just want our child to have a father." Caleb stood frozen, his mind a chaotic mess. He hated Heather. She was part of the reason he was in this mess. but a child. He was going to be a father. At the darkest, most desperate moment of his life, when he had lost everything, the arrival of a child felt like a glimmer of light. A child with his blood, a connection, a reason to exist. Maybe this was God's way of compensating him. However, his inherent suspicion made him hesitate. How do I know it's my child? Hearing this, Heather looked deeply hurt. She took a step back, clutching her belly, her tears falling even faster. I knew you wouldn't believe me, her voice was bitter. Caleb, I can lie to the whole world, but I would never lie about my own child. If you don't believe me, we can do a DNA test after the baby is born. If it's not your child, I will take the baby and disappear forever. Her conviction and pained expression broke down his last bit of reason. He was half believing, half doubting, but the desire for an anchor, for something to call his own, overwhelmed everything else. He was too lonely, too desperate. He looked at Heather's pale face, then at her growing belly. A crazy, malicious idea began to form in his mind. If he had a child, would Eleanor reconsider? If he showed her he had a new family, a new responsibility, would she regret leaving him? All right, he finally said, his voice hoarse. You can stay at my place for now. We'll talk about everything else later. He had no idea that this decision would push him even deeper into a mire of lies and humiliation. Julian's confession was like a pebble dropped into the still lake of Eleanor's heart, creating ripples that spread endlessly. She didn't immediately say yes, but she didn't say no either. Her heart had been broken once. She needed time to be brave enough to open it again. Julian didn't push her. He respected her silence, remaining by her side, patient and quiet, proving his sincerity through his actions. Things might have continued peacefully if Caleb hadn't decided to stage his most clumsy and ridiculous drama yet. After bringing Heather back to the old apartment, Caleb was completely manipulated by her. Her tears and sweet talk about our child's future made him cling to the illusion of a family in his desperation. The idea of using the baby to pressure Eleanor grew stronger in his mind. He believed Eleanor was a kind person. She wouldn't bear to see an innocent child without a complete family. He wanted to make her take responsibility for this broken situation. One afternoon, as Eleanor was leaving the publishing house, Caleb's familiar car was waiting, blocking her way. He got out, but this time he wasn't alone. Beside him was Heather, whom he was supporting carefully. Her hand was always on her belly, playing the part of a fragile pregnant woman. Eleanor stopped, her elegant brows furrowing. She no longer felt fear, only an immense sense of annoyance and disgust. Eleanor, we need to talk, Caleb said, his voice feigning a solemn tone. There's nothing left for us to talk about, Eleanor replied coldly, trying to walk around them. Wait. Caleb stepped in her way, looking at her with a mix of accusation and triumph. I know you hate me, but things have come to this and you have to take some responsibility. Eleanor almost laughed at his absurdity. Responsibility? What responsibility do I have here, Caleb? Didn't answer, just gestured toward Heather. Only then did Heather timidly look up, her eyes red, her voice weak. Eleanor, I'm sorry. I know I was wrong. But the baby in my belly is innocent. It's Caleb's child. She rubbed her belly as she spoke, her acting flawless. If you hadn't filed for divorce so heartlessly, if you hadn't pushed me to a dead end, things wouldn't have turned out like this, Caleb added his tone, making it seem like he was the victim. Now Heather is pregnant. The baby needs a father, a family. You are the one who broke our family. You have to be responsible for this. Eleanor truly couldn't comprehend his twisted logic. He cheats, gets another woman pregnant, and then comes back to demand his ex-wife take responsibility. This was the most ridiculous play she had ever seen. She looked him straight in the eye, her expression surprisingly calm. So how do you want me to be responsible? Wish you too well. All right, I wish you and the baby happiness. Is that enough? Her calmness stunned both Caleb and Heather. They had expected her to be jealous, angry, to lose control, but she was as indifferent as if she were watching a stranger's drama. Caleb was speechless. Seeing this, Heather began to cry more dramatically. Eleanor, I don't dare hope for your forgiveness. I'm just begging you, please think of the baby. It's the Thorne family's heir. Please be generous and let us be together so my child can have a proper name. Just as the drama reached its peak, a deep, cold voice came from behind Eleanor. What proper name, and who will be confirming that this child belongs to the Thorne family? Julian had arrived. He stood there, tall and steady as a mountain, his sharp eyes behind his glasses staring straight at Heather. His appearance startled her, and her crying stopped abruptly. When Caleb saw him, his anger flared again. This is my family's business. It has nothing to do with you. You're mistaken, Mr. Thorne. Julian stepped forward to stand beside Eleanor, a protective stance he didn't try to hide. I am now Miss Vance's legal representative. Any act of harassment or slander against her, I have the right to intervene. Furthermore, I'm also very curious about this heir you just mentioned. He turned to Heather, the rational, sharp gaze of a professional lawyer making her tremble. Miss Collins, you say you are pregnant with Mr. Thorne's child. Where are your regular prenatal checkup records? Which hospital did you go to? Which doctor is in charge of your case? How many weeks along are you? What were the results of your last ultrasound? A barrage of professional direct questions left Heather no room to think. Her expression changed from pitiful to panicked. I, she stammered unconsciously, wringing her hands. I went to a private clinic. The papers. I left them at home. Oh, a private clinic, Julian raised an eyebrow. Then could you please give me the name and address of that clinic? As a lawyer, I need to verify this information to protect my client's interests, as well as to determine the legal responsibilities of all parties involved. The firm logic in Julian's words had completely cornered Heather. She had never prepared for such a thorough interrogation. Her clumsy act had revealed fatal flaws. She was so frightened that her face turned pale, and she could only stammer incoherently, staring at the ground to avoid everyone's eyes. Caleb, standing beside her, saw her reaction. A huge doubt began to grow in his mind. After the dramatic confrontation, Julian didn't let the matter drop. He knew that with Caleb's stubborn nature, if this wasn't resolved completely, he would continue to harass Eleanor. That very evening, he called a private investigation firm he often worked with. The request was simple: verify if Heather's pregnancy was real. With their professional network, the answer came back in less than 24 hours. The result was exactly as he had predicted. The next morning, Julian drove straight to the industrial park where Caleb worked. He didn't call ahead. He wanted a direct, unexpected confrontation. When Julian, in his impeccable suit and exuding an air of superiority, appeared in the shabby logistics office, he caught everyone's attention. Caleb, who was slumped over his computer, immediately jumped up, his expression defensive and angry. What are you doing here? Julian didn't say much, just placed a thin file on Caleb's desk. I think you should see this. Caleb looked at him suspiciously, then at the file. He hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside were a few pages. The first was Heather's medical history from several major hospitals and clinics in the city over the past 3 months. There were no records of any prenatal visits. The second was a brief report from the investigator detailing Heather's activities over the past week. She was still wearing high heels and had even been seen drinking with friends at a bar late at night. The last page, the final nail in the coffin, was a copy of a medical record from a private clinic. It showed she had visited 2 weeks ago, but for a common cold with absolutely no signs of pregnancy. It was all fake. The pregnancy, the pitiful look, the tears, all a performance. Caleb read every word, his hands trembling. His face went from red with anger to white with shock, and finally to purple with humiliation. He had been fooled again. The first time he was blinded by Heather's lust and vanity, betraying the wife who had built everything with him. The second time, at his most desperate and miserable, he was spectacularly deceived by her lies, again turning him into a clown, a tool for her to use. He had taken a non-existent pregnancy and made a fool of himself in front of Eleanor and his rival. This collapse was even worse than when he was stripped of his rank. It was a complete collapse of his character and self-respect. He had been robbed of his last illusion, the last reason he had been clinging to. Julian looked at his devastated state, his voice still emotionless. Mr. Thorne, I didn't come here to mock you. I just want you to know the truth so you won't continue to be deceived, and so you will stop bothering Miss Vance. She deserves a peaceful life. With that, he turned and left, leaving Caleb to face the crushing reality alone. Caleb collapsed into his chair, his head spinning. He crumpled the papers in his hand, his rage and humiliation reaching a boiling point. He didn't wait for the workday to end. He immediately rushed out of the office and drove home like a madman. When he arrived at the apartment, Heather was on the sofa, eating fruit and watching TV, humming a cheerful tune. She had no idea a storm was about to break. You're home early, she said happily. Wham! The crumpled file was thrown in her face. She screamed in surprise. Keep acting. Go on, Caleb, roared, his eyes as red as a wild animal's. You're so good at playing the pitiful pregnant woman. Why don't you keep it up? Heather saw the file and all the color drained from her face. She trembled and stammered. What? What are you talking about? I don't understand. You don't understand, Caleb sneered, a twisted, frightening smile on his face. He strode over, grabbed her by the hair, and yanked her head back. You think I'm a fool, don't you? Deceiving me once wasn't enough. Now you dare to use a fake pregnancy to trick me again. You're good, Heather. You're really good. I'm sorry, Caleb. Please let me explain, Heather cried, begging for mercy. Explain, he screamed, shoving her to the floor. There's nothing left to explain. He stormed into the bedroom, grabbed all her clothes, bags, and cosmetics, and threw them out the door. Get out. Get out of my house right now, you lying, promiscuous woman. Her belongings flew out into the hallway. Curious neighbors opened their doors to watch. Heather cried as she crawled on the floor, gathering her things amidst the humiliation and contemptuous stares. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, watching the chaos he had created, panting his whole body, shaking with rage. After kicking Heather out, he slammed the door shut and slid to the floor. The room was once again plunged into a deathly silence. He sat there amidst the mess alone and empty. This time, he truly had nothing left. Not even a false hope. After Heather's scheme was exposed, Eleanor's life finally returned to true peace. No more harassing calls, no more absurd confrontations on the street. Caleb seemed to have vanished from her life. But Julian knew that the scars on her heart couldn't heal overnight. That incident, though, Eleanor didn't say, it must have reopened old wounds. One evening, as he was driving her home, he suddenly asked, "Do you like Charleston?" Eleanor was a little surprised by the random question. "Charleston, I've been once, but from books and pictures, I love it. It seems so historic and poetic." "I have to meet a client there this weekend," Julian said, his tone very natural. "It's just a 2-day trip. If you're not busy, would you like to come along as a change of scenery? You need a break after finishing that big project and dealing with all that recent trouble." Eleanor's heart fluttered. This was clearly more than just a simple invitation. It held his subtle care and understanding. He didn't directly say he wanted to take her on a relaxing trip, but used work as the perfect excuse so she wouldn't feel awkward or burdened. She looked into his sincere, hopeful eyes and nodded softly. "Yes, I'd like to go." The short flight took them away from bustling D.C. toward the poetic South. Stepping onto the tarmac in Charleston, Eleanor immediately felt a different atmosphere. The air was moist and fresh, carrying the scent of magnolia and salt water. The pace of life seemed to slow down leisurely and peaceful. Julian had booked a small inn tucked away on a cobblestone street, with a window looking directly onto a lush, private garden. After dropping off their luggage, they began to wander aimlessly. They didn't go to the crowded tourist spots, but strolled through small moss-covered alleys, admiring the graceful ironwork on historic homes. Occasionally, a horse-drawn carriage would clip-clop by. Julian rented a private carriage just for the two of them. Eleanor sat beside him, enjoying the gentle breeze. Julian didn't say much, just quietly watched her. He saw the invisible weight on her shoulders slowly lifting. Her smile became brighter, more natural. "Do you see that?" he suddenly said, pointing to the old houses along the Battery. These houses, despite enduring years of wind and rain, still retain their rustic architecture. It's like people. After going through storms, it's the inner character and essence that are most precious. Eleanor understood what he was implying. He was comforting and encouraging her in his own unique way. She turned to him and smiled. "Thank you, Julian." Their feelings blossomed gently and naturally in the ancient, peaceful setting of Charleston. There were no flowery words, no grand gestures, just an understanding gaze, a warm smile. It was him noticing her shoes were uncomfortable, and pulling her into a small shop to buy her a pair of soft leather sandals. It was him holding the umbrella tilted toward her when it suddenly rained, letting his own shoulder get soaked. That evening, after dinner at a riverside restaurant, they walked along the waterfront park. Gas lanterns cast a shimmering, magical reflection on the water. They leaned against the railing, silently admiring the poetic night scene. The night breeze was gentle, carrying the faint scent of gardenias. Julian turned to her. The warm lantern light illuminated his face, making his eyes even more gentle and deep. "Eleanor," he said her name, his voice low and warm. "The words I said at the art gallery. Have you found your answer yet?" Eleanor turned to face him, her heart beating a little faster. She looked deep into his eyes where she saw sincerity, patience, and a warm affection he no longer hid. She thought about her past marriage, about the pain, about the fear of starting a new relationship. But then she thought about Julian, about everything he had done for her. He came into her life at her darkest moment, not as a hero but as a silent companion. He gave her respect, understanding, and most importantly, he helped her find herself again. With him, she felt a sense of peace, and could be completely herself. The fear in her heart gradually dissipated, replaced by a warm feeling of trust. She knew she was ready. "Yes," she whispered. A simple word, but it held all her courage and determination. Julian's eyes lit up with radiant joy. He said nothing more, just slowly leaned down and placed a kiss on her lips. His kiss wasn't passionate or rushed, but incredibly gentle and cherished. It tasted of the Charleston night breeze, of sweet tea, and of a promising new beginning. Eleanor closed her eyes, wrapped her arms around his neck, and returned his kiss. Under the gas lanterns by the peaceful harbor, they officially became a couple. The painful past was behind them, making way for a happy future that was just beginning to unfold. Returning from the Charleston trip, Eleanor seemed like a new person. The sweet love with Julian had completely healed the last of the wounds in her heart. She was happier, more open, and a smile was always on her lips. Anyone could see the happiness overflowing in her eyes. A week after the trip, Eleanor received a text from an unknown number. "It's me, Caleb. Can you give me 10 minutes? Let's meet one last time. I just want to say a few things. After this, I'll never bother you again." The tone of the message no longer held the stubbornness or anger of before, but a strange calmness. Eleanor hesitated. She didn't want to see him again, didn't want to stir up anything from the past. She showed the message to Julian when he came to pick her up for dinner. He read it, was silent for a moment, then said, "The decision is yours. But I think this might be a chance for you to completely close that chapter. Whatever you decide, I will respect it and be by your side." Julian's words made Eleanor feel incredibly secure. He wasn't jealous or controlling, but always gave her trust and her own space. She thought for a moment and decided to go. She also needed a formal ending. She texted back, agreeing to meet at a quiet coffee shop, not a place they had any memories. The next day, Eleanor arrived at the meeting spot. Caleb was already waiting in a quiet corner. He looked completely different from the last time she saw him. No more disheveled, drunken appearance, no more defiant anger. He wore a simple white shirt, his hair was neat, and though his face was much thinner, his eyes were calm, almost resigned. The arrogance of a military major had completely vanished, replaced by the somberness of a man who had tasted the bitterness of life. Seeing her arrive, he stood up and pulled out a chair for her politely. Eleanor nodded slightly and sat down. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice hoarse. "What did you want to say?" Eleanor got straight to the point. Caleb looked at her with a complex gaze. He saw how beautiful she was now, her face radiant, her eyes full of happiness. He knew that happiness didn't belong to him. A pang of bitterness rose in his heart, but he quickly suppressed it. He knew he no longer had the right to be jealous. He took a deep breath, as if gathering all his courage. "Eleanor. I'm sorry." The words seemed difficult for him to say, but they were incredibly sincere. "I was so foolish and selfish before. I took your sacrifice and your love for granted, and then I destroyed it all with my own hands." He looked down at his coffee cup. "I didn't just betray you. I betrayed myself, destroying my future and my honor. I've been living in torment and regret. Only now do I truly understand that the most precious thing I lost was you." Eleanor just listened silently. She could feel that these words weren't part of an act to win her back, but the true remorse of a completely defeated man. Caleb looked up and met her eyes. "I didn't ask you here today to beg for your forgiveness or for you to come back. I know that's impossible. I just wanted to officially say I'm sorry. The most sincere apology. I'm sorry for all the pain I caused you." He paused, then continued, his voice sounding a little lighter. "And I also want to wish you happiness. I've seen you and Mr. Croft. He's a good man, much better than me. He can make you happy. I wish you all the best, Eleanor. You deserve it." Saying these words seemed to lift a heavy weight from Caleb's heart. He had accepted the truth, accepted his failure, and learned to let go. Eleanor looked at the man before her, the man who was once her whole world, the man who had caused her the deepest pain. Now, all the resentment in her heart seemed to vanish with his sincere apology. "It's all in the past," she said softly. "I accept your apology. I don't hate you anymore." She looked at him for the first time since the divorce with a calm gaze. "Caleb, I hope you can find peace for yourself too." "Live well." "Thank you," he nodded, a sad smile flashing across his lips. He stood up. "I'll be going now. Goodbye." "Goodbye." He turned and walked away decisively, without looking back. His posture was straighter than when he arrived. Though still lonely, he was no longer desperate. Eleanor sat alone, watching his figure disappear through the door. She let out a soft breath. The final tie to her past had finally been cut. From this moment on, she was truly free, completely and utterly. Eleanor and Julian's relationship continued to blossom in sweetness and peace. He wasn't a romantic man with flowery words, but his care was woven into the smallest details of her life. The warm milk he'd leave on her desk when she worked late, the shawl he'd drape over her shoulders when it got chilly, the way he'd sit silently beside her for hours, just so she wouldn't feel alone. With him, Eleanor felt a sense of security and stability she had never known. A month after their trip to Charleston, Julian said to her one weekend evening, "Next Saturday, my parents would like to invite you over for a family dinner." He said it casually, but his eyes held an urgent anticipation. Eleanor's heart tightened. Meeting the family. Those words carried an invisible weight. Memories of the Thorne family, their strictness, their unspoken rules, and later their contempt flooded back. Moreover, she was a divorced woman. Would his family, a prestigious and intellectual family, accept a daughter-in-law with a past like hers? Seeing the worry on her face, Julian gently took her hand and squeezed it. "Don't worry. My parents are very kind. They just want to meet the woman who made their son for the first time in his life understand what love is." His warm words eased some of her anxiety. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, I'll go." Julian's home wasn't a lavish villa, but a cozy house in a quiet residential area for retired high-level cadres. The house had a small yard filled with roses and hydrangeas, giving it a warm and peaceful feeling from the moment you entered. As Julian opened the door, a middle-aged woman with her hair in a neat bun and a warm, kind smile came out to greet them. It was his mother, Mrs. Croft, a retired piano teacher. "Julian, you're home. This must be Eleanor, right? Welcome, my dear." She showed no distance at all, taking Eleanor's hand naturally and warmly, her eyes full of kindness. "Hello, Mrs. Croft." Eleanor bowed politely, half of her tension melting away at her warmth. "Oh, call me Catherine, Mrs." Croft laughed, pulling her inside. "My husband is waiting in the living room." The living room was tastefully decorated with a large bookshelf covering one wall, a grand piano in the corner, and a few watercolor paintings. Julian's father, Mr. Croft, a retired history professor, was sitting on the sofa reading a newspaper. He was tall and slender, wearing reading glasses, looking very scholarly and gentle. Seeing them, he put down the paper and smiled kindly. You must be Eleanor. Please sit down, make yourself at home. Eleanor felt a great weight lift from her shoulders. This family's atmosphere was completely different from what she had imagined. There was no scrutiny, no polite but distant questions, only warmth and sincerity, as if she were a long-lost relative. During dinner, the conversation was lively. Mr. and Mrs. Croft never mentioned her past. They asked about her translation work, about her favorite books. When he learned she was also passionate about history and classical literature, Professor Croft became very excited. They had a spirited discussion about the American Revolution, which made Julian and his mother just sit back and smile at the two newfound soulmates. After the meal, while Julian and his father went to the yard to play chess Mrs. Croft pulled Eleanor into the kitchen to cut fruit with her. She looked at her with an affectionate gaze. Eleanor, my dear, I know about your past. Eleanor froze, her heart tightening again. Seeing her expression, Mrs. Croft quickly took her hand. Don't overthink it. I'm not saying this to make you uncomfortable. I just want to tell you that the past is the past. It doesn't define who you are. Everyone stumbles in life. What's important is whether we have the courage to get back up and move forward. And I see that you are a very strong and resilient young woman. She sighed softly. My Julian has been quiet and reserved since he was a child. He's seen too many unhappy marriages among his friends and colleagues, and it made him lose faith in love. He's over 30, and has never truly loved anyone. My husband and I were worried sick, but since he met you, he has changed so much. He smiles more, he's more considerate. Looking at the way he looks at you, I know he's found the right person. She squeezed Eleanor's hand. So Eleanor, don't feel insecure about your past. Just be yourself, a kind, talented, and strong woman. Our family will always welcome you. Mrs. Croft's sincere and warm words completely broke down the last barriers in Eleanor's heart. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude and happiness. For the first time, she felt the warmth of a real family of unconditional acceptance. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much. Mrs. Croft smiled, gently wiping away her tears. Silly girl, we're all family now. There's no need for thanks. Half a year later, Eleanor's translation career reached new heights. After the success of The Blue Sands, the publishing house entrusted her with translating a classic of French literature. With her extensive knowledge and increasingly polished style, her second translation once again became a sensation, receiving countless accolades from critics and a warm reception from readers. The publishing house organized another book launch event, this time on a much grander scale. The venue was the main hall of the National Book Center, a prestigious and formal location. This time Eleanor felt no nervousness or timidity. She stood on stage in a pure white evening gown that Julian had chosen for her. Her hair elegantly styled up, revealing her long, slender neck and a face with light, radiant makeup. She was completely in command of the stage. She shared interesting behind-the-scenes stories, provided deep analysis of the work's humanistic values, and cleverly answered tough questions from critics. The entire hall listened in rapt silence, captivated by her intelligence and charm. In the audience, Julian sat with his parents and her best friend, Chloe. He watched his woman shining so brightly up there, his heart filled with pride and love. He knew the time had come. The Q&A session was coming to an end. After Eleanor answered the last question from a reader, the female MC smiled and spoke into the microphone. Yes, a huge thank you to translator Eleanor Vance for her incredibly insightful sharing. And before we conclude the program, we have just received a request for one very special final question from a very special audience member. The hall buzzed with curiosity. Eleanor was also a little surprised. She looked at the MC. The stage lights suddenly dimmed, leaving only a soft spotlight on her. At the same time, another spotlight shone down on the audience, landing directly on Julian. He slowly stood up, holding not a book, but a microphone that had been prepared for him. Eleanor's heart began to race. What is he doing? Julian looked straight at the stage, his gaze gentle and deep, holding only her reflection. He began to speak, his warm, steady voice echoing through the hall. Eleanor, the first time I saw you shine was on a stage just like this. Back then, I admired your strength and resilience. Gradually, I was drawn to your intelligence, your pure soul, and your kind heart. He began walking slowly toward the stage, each step firm and determined. You are a translator. You use words to connect souls to tell beautiful stories. But did you know? The most beautiful story I have ever known is ours. A story of rebirth, of courage, and of a love that came when it was least expected. By now, he had reached the stage. The entire hall held its breath. Chloe was covering her mouth, her eyes welling up with tears of joy. Julian stood before Eleanor just a step away. He looked deep into her tear-filled eyes, full of surprise and happiness. Eleanor, you have finished translating a very beautiful chapter of your life, and I want to be the one to write all the remaining chapters with you. I want to be your companion, your support, your family for the rest of our lives. Then, to Eleanor's astonishment and the excited gasps of the entire hall, Julian slowly got down on one knee. He opened a deep blue velvet box. Inside was an exquisitely designed platinum ring, with a small but flawless diamond shining with a pure, brilliant light. "Marry me." 3 simple words, but the most sincere and sacred vow. Eleanor was completely overwhelmed, tears of happiness streaming down her face. She couldn't speak, only nodding her head again and again. Julian smiled radiantly, the happiest smile she had ever seen. He carefully slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He stood up gently, wiped the tears from her cheeks, and pulled her into a tight embrace. The hall erupted in thunderous applause and cheers of congratulations. Julian's parents in the audience were also smiling through happy tears. Under the bright stage lights, amidst the blessings of everyone, Eleanor rested her head on Julian's steady chest, listening to the strong beat of his heart. She knew the storm of her life was truly over. After the rain, the sky had cleared and a brilliant rainbow named Happiness was waiting for her just ahead. The news of the romantic proposal at the book launch quickly spread through the publishing world, and even on some smaller social media pages. Eleanor and Julian became an admired couple, a beautiful love story between a talented female translator and an elite male lawyer. Eleanor's life was filled with the sweetness of love and happiness. They began planning their wedding, a small, cozy ceremony on the beach, just as she had always dreamed. One weekend afternoon, Julian took her to a high-end shopping mall in the city to pick out a few things for their future home. Hand in hand, they strolled through luxury stores, occasionally stopping to discuss whether to choose an English or Japanese tea, set a crystal chandelier, or a silk lantern. A happy smile never left Eleanor's face. As they passed a high-end French cosmetics counter, Eleanor suddenly stopped. Her eyes accidentally fell on a familiar figure behind the counter. It was Heather. She was no longer the beautiful, haughty nurse in designer clothes. Now Heather was wearing an ill-fitting black sales associate uniform, her hair hastily tied up, her face heavily made up, but unable to hide the dark circles and haggard look. Her once sparkling, flirtatious eyes were now filled with a look of weariness and resentment as she bowed to demanding customers. As if sensing someone was watching her, Heather looked up. The moment their eyes met, both were stunned. But Heather's shock quickly turned into unconcealable jealousy when she saw Eleanor happy and hand in hand with Julian. She looked at Eleanor's elegant dress, the limited edition designer handbag on her arm, and then looked down at her own cheap uniform. The stark contrast was like a slap in the face to her already shattered pride. Eleanor didn't want to cause trouble. She gently tugged on Julian's hand, about to leave, but Heather spoke up, her voice sour and sarcastic. Well, look who it is. Eleanor, you've certainly moved up in the world, haven't you? Barely left Caleb and already found a much stronger backer. Some people are just lucky. Don't have to do anything and rich men are lining up to give you the world. Her harsh words made a few nearby customers look over curiously. Julian frowned, about to say something, but Eleanor squeezed his hand, signaling him not to bother. She turned to face Heather. There was no anger, no contempt. On her beautiful face there was only a strange calmness, the calmness of someone who had reached a different level and no longer cared to bicker over the trivial matters of the past. Eleanor smiled, a gentle, sincere smile. Heather, it's been a while. How have you been? Eleanor's indifferent attitude, as if nothing had ever happened, only made Heather more furious. Whether I'm doing well or not has nothing to do with you. Don't stand here acting all high and mighty. Seeing me down on my luck, you must be gloating inside, right? You're mistaken. Eleanor shook her head slightly, her voice still gentle. I don't have time to gloat over other people's misfortune. I'm too busy living my own happy life. She raised her hand to brush back a stray strand of hair, revealing the sparkling diamond ring on her finger. This unintentional gesture was like a sharp knife stabbing Heather's eyes. Happiness isn't about luck. It's about choices, Eleanor said, looking directly into Heather's eyes, her own gaze clear and calm. I chose to let go of what didn't belong to me so I could hold on to what I truly deserved. Perhaps you should also learn to let go of your jealousy and hatred so you can find some peace for yourself. With that, she gave Heather no chance to respond. She turned to Julian with a sweet smile. Darling, let's go. I saw a beautiful set of dishes in that home goods store over there. Of course, Julian smiled dotingly, his eyes full of pride. He held her hand tightly, and they walked away calmly, completely ignoring Heather, as if she were air. Heather stood frozen, watching their happy figures recede. Eleanor's words, without a single curse or hint of malice, were more damaging than 1,000 insults. Eleanor's calmness and happiness were the sweetest and most brutal revenge. It made Heather realize a harsh truth from start to finish: she was never Eleanor's rival. She had lost miserably. Standing in the middle of the luxurious counter surrounded by expensive cosmetics she could no longer afford, Heather burst into tears. But these belated tears could not wash away the mistakes and humiliation she now had to bear. The chance encounter with Heather was like a light breeze, leaving no ripples in Eleanor's life. She had truly let go of the past. Now her mind was filled only with sweet plans for the future, for the upcoming wedding, for the cozy little home she and Julian would build. One afternoon, as Eleanor was reading by the window sipping a cup of chamomile tea, her phone rang. Seeing the familiar Thorne family number, her heart beat a little faster, not with anxiety but with a complex, indescribable emotion. She knew it couldn't be Caleb. She answered, and a deep, somewhat weary voice came through. Eleanor. It's Robert. Hello, Robert, Eleanor replied politely. After their last meal, she had come to see General Thorne as a respected elder. Are you busy with anything? No, Robert. I'm just at home. Ah, good. General Thorne seemed to let out a small sigh of relief. I called to congratulate you. I heard about you and that young man Julian. I saw the pictures in the paper. You look very happy. I'm truly happy for you. The sincere blessing from her former father-in-law warmed Eleanor's heart. Thank you, Robert. That young man, Croft, I've heard of him. A good lawyer, a good man. I feel at ease knowing you are with him. He paused, then his voice lowered, as if choosing his words carefully. And I also wanted to tell you something. That boy, Caleb. He has decided to leave. D.C. Eleanor paused a little surprised. Leave? D.C. Yes. General Thorne replied. After everything he said, he no longer has the face to stay in this city. He wants to go to another city in the south, a place where no one knows him to start over. He's found a normal job there. Perhaps it's a good choice for him. His voice held no blame, only acceptance and the faint sorrow of a father. He asked me to pass on a message to you. He said he is sorry, and he wishes you happiness. Hearing these words, Eleanor felt her heart lighten. A true end. Caleb was leaving, taking all the painful memories with him, leaving her with a clear and peaceful sky. All grudges and hatred at this moment were truly resolved. I understand, Robert, Eleanor said softly. I also hope he can find a better new life. You are a good child, Eleanor, General Thorne said with emotion. It was our Thorne family that was not fortunate enough. In the future, even though you have your own family, if you don't mind, always think of me as a friend. If you ever have any difficulties, just give this old man a call. Yes, Robert. Eleanor was moved to tears. Thank you. Please take care of your health too. I will. You get some rest now. I won't bother you anymore. After hanging up, Eleanor sat quietly for a long time looking out the window. The sky after a summer rain was clear and high. An unprecedented sense of peace filled her soul. The book of her old marriage had finally been turned to its last page and closed gently. That evening, when Julian came home, she told him about the phone call. He said nothing, just quietly pulled her into his arms, a tight, warm embrace. It's really over, isn't it? She whispered, resting her head on his steady chest. Yes, he replied, his voice deep and reassuring. It's all over. From now on, your life will only be filled with good things. Eleanor closed her eyes and smiled peacefully. She knew he was telling the truth. All grudges were resolved, the past was truly at rest. Ahead of her was a bright and happy future. The beach in Malibu, California, on a late autumn afternoon was clear and tranquil. The sky was high and cloudless. The honey-colored light of the setting sun cast a golden sheen on the fine white sand and the calm, mirror-like sea. A gentle sea breeze blew, carrying the distinctive salty tang and the sound of waves lapping the shore like an endless love song. On the beach, a small, simple, but incredibly warm wedding was taking place. There were no hundreds of strange guests, no extravagant ceremonies, just a floral arch made of pure white roses and baby's breath, and a few rows of white wooden chairs for their dearest loved ones. The guests numbered only 6, Eleanor's parents, Julian's parents, and her best friend Chloe. Everyone was dressed comfortably, their faces beaming with joy and sincere blessings. Eleanor stood under the floral arch hand in hand with Julian. She wore a simple yet elegant ivory white wedding dress, the soft silk material fluttering gently in the breeze. Her hair was loosely braided, adorned with tiny baby's breath flowers. She wore light makeup, just a thin foundation and a touch of dusty rose lipstick, enough to enhance her gentle, delicate beauty and the radiant happiness in her eyes. This was the second time she had worn a wedding dress, but the feeling was completely different. The first time in a lavish but cold ceremony, her heart was filled with anxiety and a fragile hope. Today, standing here beside this man, her heart felt only peace, trust, and a solid, certain happiness. Julian was not in his usual stiff lawyer's suit. He wore a light beige linen suit, looking youthful and incredibly dapper. He held her hand tightly, his palm warm and steady, giving her an absolute sense of security. He looked at her, his gaze as gentle as water, filled with all his cherish and love. The officiant was a friend of Professor Croft, an elderly scholar with white hair and a kind smile. After some warm opening words, he looked at them and said, "Now I invite the bride and groom to exchange their vows." Julian turned to face Eleanor. He took a small, neatly folded piece of paper from his pocket but then smiled and put it away. He said he wanted these words to come straight from his heart. He looked deep into her eyes, his warm, sincere voice rising above the sound of the waves. "Eleanor, before I met you, my world was only filled with dry laws and broken marriages. I used to think that love was just a fickle, unreliable emotion. But then you came along. You walked into my life like a cool, fresh breeze. You showed me what resilience is, what forgiveness is, and the beauty of a soul that never surrenders. He raised his hand and gently caressed her cheek. I can't promise you a life of luxury, but I swear on my life and honor that I will give you a family. A place where you will never have to sacrifice, never have to be hurt. A place where you can be freely yourself, loved and cherished. I will be your safe harbor, your steady support for the rest of our lives. Eleanor, will you be my wife? Tears of happiness rolled down Eleanor's cheeks. She was choked with emotion, never imagining that a reserved man like him could say such moving words. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice from trembling. Julian, she looked at him, her eyes sparkling like stars. I used to think my life was like a poorly translated book, full of mistakes and tears. I was lost in the darkness, unable to find a way out. Thank you for coming like a lighthouse, illuminating my path. You helped me correct the mistakes, helped me find my own worth, helped me believe that after the rain, the sun will shine again. She smiled through her tears. I don't need a luxurious world. I just need a home. A home with you. Yes, I will be your wife, Julian. From this day forward, we will write a new story together. A story filled with only laughter and happiness. They exchanged wedding rings, two simple, unadorned platinum bands, a testament to a sincere and eternal love. You may now kiss the bride. Julian smiled, gently lifting her chin, and placed a deep, sweet kiss on her lips. The applause of their loved ones rang out, mingling with the sound of the waves, creating the most beautiful symphony of happiness. The sun slowly set over the sea, painting the sky in vibrant shades of orange and red. Eleanor rested her head on Julian's shoulder, watching the magnificent sunset with him. She knew the darkness of her life was truly behind her. A new dawn, a new life, filled with light and love was waiting for her. Epilogue. 4 years later. In a quiet garden villa in Great Falls, Virginia, autumn had arrived. The maple trees in the garden had turned a brilliant red. Whenever a light breeze blew, the leaves would flutter down onto the green lawn, creating a picturesque scene. Eleanor sat on a wooden swing under a wisteria trellis, her feet gently swaying. She was reading a new novel manuscript, but her gaze would occasionally drift up, a smile on her face as she watched her little son playing on the grass. 4 years had passed and her life had changed miraculously. She was no longer a novice translator, but had become one of the most respected and sought-after names in the literary world. The works she translated were guaranteed for both their artistic quality and sales. She was now free to choose the projects she loved, working from home on a flexible schedule to spend more time with her family. Julian was still a top lawyer, but he no longer took on as many cases. He dedicated most of his free time to his wife and son. The cold, distant man of the past had been replaced by the warm, serene presence of a husband and father. "Mommy, look." Little Atticus Croft, a chubby and adorable 3-year-old, waddled toward her. In his hand was a bright red maple leaf he had just found. The boy had his father's bright, intelligent eyes, but his smile was as radiant and warm as his mother's. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Eleanor smiled, pulling him into her arms and kissing his chubby cheeks. "My Atticus is so clever." Julian came out from the house, holding a warm cup of her favorite chamomile tea. He wore a thin gray sweater, looking incredibly relaxed and gentle. He placed the tea on the small table next to the swing, and then from behind wrapped his arms around both mother and son. "What are you two so happy about?" He gently rubbed his stubbled chin against her cheek, an intimate gesture that had become a habit. "Atticus was just showing me his trophy," Eleanor said, leaning her head against his shoulder, enjoying the familiar sense of peace. Seeing his dad, Atticus cheered and asked to be picked up. Julian smiled, lifting his son into the air, tossing him gently and catching him amidst the boys' peals of laughter. Eleanor sat on the swing quietly, watching the two most important men in her life play happily under the golden autumn sun. Her heart was filled with a sense of warmth and gratitude. There was a time she thought she would never smile again, that she would forever be lost in the darkness of betrayal and pain. But life was truly magical. It had taken from her a terrible husband, but it had given her a man 100,000 times better. A man who had patiently healed all her wounds, held her hand, and led her out of the mire of the past, given her a real family and a complete love. "What are you thinking about?" Julian asked softly, sitting down beside her after playing with their son. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes sparkling with a deep happiness. She shook her head and smiled. After passing through a violent storm, the ship of her life had finally reached the most peaceful harbor. No more rough seas, no more tempests, only blue skies, white clouds, golden sunshine, and the people she loved most always by her side. This was the true destination of her life.